I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. I should have known something was off when I couldn't hear any birds. We'd been driving for hours, winding through dense forest on roads that got narrower and rougher with each mile. The GPS had lost signal long ago, and cell service was a distant memory. Just when I was starting to wonder if we'd made a huge mistake, the trees parted to reveal our home for the next 3 days. A rustic log cabin perched on the edge of a small clearing. Well, this is cozy, my wife Sarah said, peering through the windshield. I killed the engine, and we sat there for a moment, taking it all in. The cabin looked sturdy enough, with a wide porch and dark windows that reflected the sea of green surrounding us. But something about the silence made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Where are all the birds? I wondered aloud. Sarah shrugged. Maybe they're just quiet this time of day. Come on, let's check it out. We stepped out of the car, and the silence hit me like a physical thing. No wind in the trees, no rustling underbrush, not even the hum of insects. Just nothing. Wow, you can really get away from it all out here, Sarah said, stretching. I can't wait to unplug for a few days. I nodded, trying to shake off the unease. We'd been planning this getaway for months, a chance to reconnect and recharge away from the chaos of city life. I wasn't going to let a little quiet spook me. We lugged our bags onto the porch, and I fished the key out of the envelope we'd received from the rental company. The door creaked open, revealing a cozy interior that smelled of pine and wood smoke. "Oh, this is perfect," Sarah breathed, taking in the overstuffed couch, the stone fireplace, and the large windows that looked out into the forest. I had to admit, it was pretty idyllic. We spent the next hour unpacking and exploring our temporary home. There were 2 bedrooms, a small but well-equipped kitchen, and even a back porch with a hot tub. By the time we finished, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. "Want to take a walk before dinner?" I asked, already feeling more relaxed. Sarah agreed, and we set off down a narrow trail that led deeper into the woods. The trees pressed in close on either side, their branches forming a canopy overhead that filtered the fading sunlight. It was beautiful, in an almost primeval way, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Hey," I said, stopping suddenly. "Do you notice anything weird about the trees?" Sarah looked around, frowning. "What do you mean?" I stepped closer to one of the massive trunks, running my hand over the rough bark. "I can't put my finger on it, but something seems off." She joined me, examining the tree. "It looks like a normal tree to me, babe. Maybe you're just not used to being around so much nature." I laughed, trying to play off my unease. "Yeah, you're probably right. City boy syndrome, I guess." We continued our walk, but I couldn't stop glancing at the trees. It wasn't until we were heading back, the light almost gone, that I realized what had been bothering me. None of the trees had any knots or imperfections. Every trunk was perfectly smooth, unnaturally so. That night, as we sat on the porch, nursing glasses of wine, the forest came alive with sound. Crickets chirped, owls hooted, and something that sounded suspiciously like a wolf howled in the distance. "See?" Sarah said, snuggling closer to me. "Nothing to worry about. Nature was just sleeping earlier." I nodded, letting the sounds and the wine soothe my nerves. By the time we went to bed, I'd almost forgotten about my earlier unease. The next morning, I woke early, drawn outside by the promise of coffee on the porch and a chance to see the forest in the dawn light. As I stepped outside, mug in hand, I nearly dropped it in shock. There, carved into the trunk of the nearest tree, was a crude symbol. It looked like a circle with a slash through it, the edges rough as if done with a pocket knife. I set my mug down and moved closer, my heart pounding. The carving looked fresh, the exposed wood still light against the dark bark. "Sarah," I called, my voice sounding too loud in the morning quiet. "Come look at this." She joined me a moment later, wrapping a robe around herself. "What's wrong?" I pointed at the symbol. "Tell me you see that." She squinted, then her eyes widened. "What the? Was that there yesterday?" I shook my head. "No way. I would have noticed it." We spent the next hour searching the clearing, finding 3 more trees with identical symbols carved into them. They formed a rough semicircle around the cabin, each one facing directly towards us. "Maybe it's just some kids playing a prank," Sarah suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to think logically. Out here, miles from anywhere. And how would they have done this without us hearing them? She had no answer for that. We tried to salvage the day, going for a hike and then soaking in the hot tub, but an undercurrent of tension ran beneath everything we did. That night, we double-checked all the locks and drew the curtains tight before going to bed. I woke in the darkness, my bladder insisting I get up. Groggy and disoriented, I stumbled to the bathroom. On my way back to bed, a flicker of movement outside the window caught my eye. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Slowly, I approached the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to peek out. The full moon bathed the clearing in silver light, throwing deep shadows between the trees. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a shadow moved. It was hard to make out details, but I could have sworn I saw a figure dart between 2 trees at the edge of the clearing. I blinked, and it was gone. "John, what are you doing?" Sarah's sleepy voice made me jump. I let the curtain fall back into place. Nothing, just thought I saw something outside. She sat up, suddenly alert. What did you see?" I hesitated, not wanting to scare her. "Probably just a deer or something. Go back to sleep." But sleep didn't come easily for either of us after that. The next morning dawned grey and misty. I was up with the sun, too keyed up to sleep. I made coffee on autopilot, my eyes drawn constantly to the windows. When I finally worked up the courage to step outside, my mug slipped from nerveless fingers and shattered on the porch. The symbols were everywhere. Every tree I could see bore the same crude circle and slash, no longer confined to the edge of the clearing. They formed concentric rings around the cabin, getting denser as they got closer. The nearest trees were covered in overlapping symbols, the bark shredded by repeated carving. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered from behind me. I hadn't even heard her come out. I turned to her, my mind racing. "We need to leave now." She nodded, her face pale. We threw our belongings haphazardly into our bags, not bothering to clean or straighten up. Within 20 minutes, we were in the car, the engine rumbling to life. That's when I noticed the final horror. The driveway, our only way out, was blocked by a massive fallen tree. It hadn't been there when we arrived. I was certain of it. The trunk was too big to drive around, and even if we had an axe, it would take hours to clear. "No, no, no," Sarah chanted, her voice rising in panic. I put the car in reverse, ready to try another direction, any direction. But as I looked in the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. More trees had fallen behind us, boxing us in on all sides. We were trapped. The silence descended again, heavier than ever. No birds, no insects, Not even the whisper of wind through leaves. Just the idling of the engine and our ragged breathing. Then, slowly, the trees began to move. It started with a subtle shifting, like a mirage in the desert heat. But it quickly became unmistakable. The trunks were bending, twisting towards us. Branches reached out like grasping fingers, scraping against the car's windows. Sarah screamed, and I gunned the engine, but there was nowhere to go. The trees pressed in closer, their bark rippling like muscle beneath skin. The cymbals pulsed with an inner light, and I realized with dawning horror that they weren't carved at all. They were growing. As the first branch punched through the windshield, I had one final, terrible thought. We hadn't chosen this cabin for our getaway. It had chosen us. Story 2. I never thought I'd be afraid of fresh air. The crisp mountain breeze that had invigorated me just days ago now felt like icy fingers running down my spine. I huddled closer to my campfire, watching the smoke curl upwards into the star-studded sky. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache with a mixture of awe and terror, because the smoke was wrong. So wrong. It had started 3 days ago. I'd been planning this solo camping trip for months, a chance to challenge myself and clear my head after a brutal year at work. The first day had been perfect, a grueling hike up to a secluded plateau, the satisfaction of setting up camp, and the simple pleasure of a meal cooked over an open fire. That night, I'd sat by the fire, feeling more at peace than I had in years. The smoke drifted lazily upwards, carried away by a gentle breeze. I remember thinking how nice it was, the predictability of it all. Fire burns, smoke rises, wind blows. If only I'd known how quickly certainty could turn to chaos. I woke the next morning to the smell of wood smoke. Groggy and disoriented, I unzipped my tent and poked my head out. The campfire had long since burned out, but a thin trail of smoke still rose from the ashes. Straight up, I blinked, sure I was seeing things. There was a stiff breeze blowing. I could feel it on my face, see it ruffling the grass around my campsite. But the smoke ignored it completely, rising in a perfectly vertical column. Weird, I muttered, chalking it up to some quirk of air currents I didn't understand. I had a long day of hiking ahead of me, so I put it out of my mind. The day passed uneventfully. I explored a nearby ridge, marveling at the view of endless forest stretching to the horizon. By the time I made it back to camp, my legs were pleasantly sore and my mind calm. As night fell, I got another fire going. This time, I watched the smoke carefully. At first, it behaved normally, drifting with the wind. But as the fire settled into a steady burn, the smoke changed. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, it began to straighten. Within an hour, it was rising straight up again, utterly defying the breeze that tugged at my clothes. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there had to be a logical explanation. But as I lay in my tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The next morning, things got worse. I woke to find my campsite enveloped in a thick fog. That wasn't too unusual for the mountains, but something about it made my skin crawl. It took me a few minutes to realize what it was. The fog wasn't moving, not drifting, not swirling, just hanging there. Like the smoke, it seemed to be ignoring the wind entirely. I broke camp quickly, my heart pounding. I needed to get down the mountain, to get back to civilization, where things made sense. But as I started to hike, I realized the fog was following me. No matter which direction I went, it maintained a perfect circle around me, never thinning or thickening. By midday, I was in a full-blown panic. I'd been walking for hours, but the scenery never changed. The same trees, the same rocks, over and over again. It was like being stuck in some kind of natural loop. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Is anyone there?" The fog swallowed my words, muffling them. But a moment later, I heard something that made my blood run cold. My own voice, calling back to me from the distance. "Hello, is anyone there?" I ran. I don't know for how long or in what direction. The fog parted before me and closed behind me, always maintaining that perfect circle. When I finally collapsed, gasping for air, I was right back at my campsite. That was yesterday. I haven't tried to leave again. What's the point? Wherever I go, the forest brings me back here. To this clearing, this fire pit, this little patch of hell I've carved out for myself in the wilderness. So now I sit, feeding the fire, watching that unnaturally straight column of smoke rise into the sky. It feels like a beacon, or maybe a giant middle finger to the laws of physics, to sanity itself. I hear things moving in the fog sometimes, whispers that might be the wind, if the wind could form words. Shadows that look almost human until I blink and they're gone. The worst part is the waiting, because I know, deep in my bones, that all of this is building to something. Nature itself has turned against me, herding me to this spot. But why? What could it possibly want from me? As if in answer to my unspoken question, the fire suddenly flares up, startling me. The flames dance higher than they should, given the meager amount of wood I've been feeding it. And in those flames, I see something. Shapes coalesce in the fire, twisting and morphing. For a moment, I think I see a face. My face, contorted in a silent scream. Then it's gone, replaced by a rapid succession of images. A city street I've never seen. A dark room filled with blinking lights. A operating table surrounded by figures in hazmat suits. I scramble backwards, heart pounding. "What are you?" I whisper, not sure if I'm talking to the fire, the fog, or the forest itself. The flames twist again, forming letters this time. They hover there, shimmering in the heat. Not what. W-H-E-N. A hysterical laugh bubbles up from my chest. What does that even mean? As if in response, a gust of wind whips through the clearing. For a brief, hopeful moment, I think things might be returning to normal. But then I realize the wind isn't dispersing the fog or affecting the smoke. Instead, it's gathering leaves, twigs, and dust into a small whirlwind. The debris begins to take shape, forming a crude humanoid figure. It's like watching a time-lapse video of evolution, compressed into seconds. The figure grows more defined, developing features, clothes, details. I find myself looking at me, a perfect replica, down to the 3-day stubble on my chin and the worn hiking boots on my feet. The only difference is the eyes. They're completely black, like pools of tar. "What? What are you?" I manage to choke out. My doppelganger smiles, and it's the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. When it speaks, its voice is mine, but layered with something ancient and alien. "We are the forest," it says. "We are the mountains, the rivers, the very air you breathe. We have always been here, watching, waiting." I shake my head, trying to deny the impossible thing in front of me. But why? Why me? The thing wherein my face tilts its head, considering. You humans, you think you're so separate from nature. You build your cities, your machines, thinking you've conquered the world. But you're just children, playing in a sandbox you don't understand. It takes a step closer. and I scrambled back until I hit a tree. The bark feels wrong against my palm, too smooth and warm, almost like skin. We've been patient, my doppelganger continues. We've watched you grow, waited for you to be ready. And now, finally, one of you has heard our call. A horrible realization dawns on me. The camping trip. I didn't choose to come here, did I? You brought me here. It nods, looking pleased. Smart. That's why we chose you. You can see the patterns, feel the wrongness. You're ready to understand. Understand what? I ask, even as every fiber of my being screams at me to run, to fight, to do anything but listen. The thing smiles again, and the black pools of its eyes seem to expand, swallowing up the rest of its face. Everything, it says, its voice now a chorus of whispers. The true nature of reality. The world behind the world. It reaches out a hand, and I can't move, can't breathe. Its fingers brush my forehead, and suddenly I'm falling, tumbling through layers of reality I never knew existed. I see the earth as it truly is. Not a dead rock spinning through space, but a living, breathing entity. I see the hidden connections between all things, the flow of energy that binds the universe together. And I see other things, darker things, squirming at the edges of creation. When I come back to myself, I'm on my knees, gasping. The doppelganger is gone, along with the fog and the unnatural stillness. The smoke from my campfire drifts normally in the breeze, but I'm not the same. I can feel the change in every cell of my body, in the very fabric of my thoughts. The forest is alive around me, pulsing with an awareness I can no longer ignore. I stand on shaky legs and begin to break camp. I need to get back to civilization, to warn them, or maybe to hide from what I've become. I'm not sure which yet. As I shoulder my pack and take one last look at the clearing, I hear that chorus of whispers again, carried on the wind. Welcome home. I turn and start walking, unsure if I'm fleeing from or following the call of the wild. All I know is that the nature of fear has changed for me forever. Story 3. The key felt impossibly heavy in my hand, its brass surface cool against my skin. I stood on the overgrown path leading to my grandmother's house, surrounded by towering pines that whispered secrets in the breeze. I hadn't been here in years, not since I was a little girl. Now, at 28, I was back to claim my inheritance. You can do this live, I muttered to myself, taking a deep breath of pine-scented air. The house loomed before me, a Victorian monstrosity that seemed to have grown organically from the forest floor. Its weathered clapboards were the grey of old bones, and dark windows stared down at me like empty eye sockets. A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. I mounted the creaking steps to the wraparound porch, leaves crunching underfoot. The key slid into the lock with a reluctance that mirrored my own. For a moment, I considered turning back, selling the place sight unseen and never looking back. But curiosity, and if I'm honest, a hint of greed, won out. The door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo through the entire house. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that pierced the gloom, and the musty smell of long abandoned rooms assaulted my nose. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish, even as I did so. No one had lived here since Gran passed away 6 months ago. Silence answered me, broken only by the settling of old wood and the skittering of what I desperately hoped were just mice in the walls. I made my way through the house, flicking light switches that did nothing. The power must have been cut off ages ago. Each room was a time capsule, frozen sometime in the mid-20th century. Faded floral wallpaper peeled at the corners, and heavy furniture lurked beneath dusty sheets like sleeping beasts. As I climbed the grand staircase, my hand trailing along the smooth mahogany banister, memories bubbled up from the depths of my mind. Summers spent exploring the endless rooms, Gran's laughter echoing through the halls, and something else. A door that was always locked, a room I was never allowed to enter. My feet carried me down the upstairs hallway of their own accord. I knew, without knowing how I knew, exactly where I was going. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed it open. The room beyond was not what I expected. While the rest of the house was stuck in the past, this space looked like it had been teleported from the future. Sleek computers hummed on polished desks, their screensavers casting an eerie blue glow across the room. File cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled with dates spanning decades, some stretching well into the future. "What the hell, Gran?" I whispered, stepping inside. That's when I saw it. An old Polaroid camera sat on a central table, surrounded by stacks of photos. My hands trembled as I picked up the nearest stack. The top photo showed me, standing exactly where I was standing now, holding these very photos. The time stamp in the corner read October 15th, 2023. Today's date? No way, I breathed, flipping to the next photo. It was me again, this time sitting at one of the computers, my face illuminated by the screen. The time stamp was a week from now. With growing dread, I flipped through photo after photo. Me in various places around the house, in the nearby town, even in cities I'd never visited. The timestamps marched forward, months, years into the future. The last photo made my blood run cold. It showed me, visibly older, lying in a hospital bed. The timestamp was exactly 50 years from today. A noise behind me made me whirl around, photos scattering across the floor. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the dim hallway light. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was Gran's ghost. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was me. Or rather, an older version of me, maybe in her 40s. "Hello, Liv," my older self said with a sad smile. "I've been waiting a long time for this day." I backed away, bumping into the table and sending the camera clattering to the floor. "This isn't real," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm dreaming, or I've gone insane." The other me shook her head. "I'm afraid it's all too real. I know how confusing and terrifying this is. I've been in your shoes, after all." "Who? What are you?" I managed to ask. "I'm you, about 15 years from now," she replied. "And I'm here to explain everything. Or at least, as much as I can." Over the next hour, my future self told me a story that shattered my understanding of reality. The camera, she explained, had been in our family for generations. It didn't just take photos. It took photos of the future. Gran discovered its power when she was about your age, my older self said. She spent her whole life trying to understand it, to see if the future it showed could be changed. "Can it?" I asked, a glimmer of hope rising in my chest. The other me shrugged. "Sometimes yes, sometimes no. The big things, births, deaths, major life events, those seem to be fixed. But the details, the paths we take to get there, those can be altered." She went on to explain that Gran had turned the house into a research station of sorts. The computers were loaded with complex algorithms trying to make sense of the photos, to find patterns in the chaos of time. "But why me?" I asked. "Why didn't Gran tell anyone else about this?" My older self's expression turned grim. "Because it's a curse, as much as a gift, Liv. Knowing the future, it changes you. Gran tried to protect us from it for as long as she could, but she always knew it would fall to us eventually. I sank into a nearby chair, my mind reeling. So what happens now? Now, my older self said, you have a choice to make. You can walk away, sell the house, destroy the camera, try to live a normal life, or, I prompted, already knowing I couldn't walk away from this. Or you can pick up where Gran left off. Try to understand the nature of time itself. Use this knowledge to help people, to change the world. I looked down at the scattered photos on the floor. My entire life laid out before me in fragments of future moments. Is that what you did? What I'm going to do? My older self smiled enigmatically. That's for you to decide. My being here has already changed things. Your future is no longer exactly the same as my past. A thought struck me. Wait, if you're from the future, how are you here now? She held up a device that looked like a sleek, futuristic watch. Let's just say the camera isn't the only piece of advanced technology in this house. But I can't stay long. Timeline conservation and all that. As if on cue, the device on her wrist began to beep urgently. I have to go, she said, already beginning to fade like a mirage. Remember, live. The future isn't set in stone. It's a garden of forking paths, and you're the gardener. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the room with the humming computers and the life-changing camera. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in thought. The sun had set by the time I stirred, the room now lit only by the ghostly glow of monitors. I stood up, my joints creaking in protest, and walked over to the camera. My hand hovered over it, trembling slightly. Did I dare? Did I have the strength to see what the future held, knowing I might be powerless to change it? In the end, curiosity won out again. I picked up the camera, pointed it at myself, and pressed the button. The flash momentarily blinded me, and I blinked away spots as the photo slid out. I waited with bated breath as the image slowly developed. When it finally cleared, I gasped. The photo showed me, maybe a year or two older, standing in this very room. But I wasn't alone. A man stood beside me, his arm around my waist. We were both smiling at the camera, looking happier than I could ever remember being. In the background, one of the computer screens displayed a headline: Time Travel. Breakthrough Shocks Scientific Community. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in my own handwriting, was a note. The future's not so scary when you have someone to face it with. He's in the coffee shop on Main Street. Go get him, and let's make some history. I looked back at the camera, then at the photo in my hand. For the first time since entering this house, I felt a spark of excitement cutting through the fear. Well, Gran, I said to the empty room, a smile tugging at my lips. Looks like I've got some work to do. I pocketed the photo, hefted the camera, and strode out of the room with newfound purpose. The future was waiting, and I had a date with destiny. Story 4. The first email arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because I was neck-deep in quarterly reports, my desk a war zone of coffee-stained papers and post-it notes. The gentle ping of my inbox was a welcome distraction. From David, Chun at Gmail. Con to David, Chen Jamil. Calm subject. Hello me, hey David. Just a quick reminder to pick up milk on the way home. You know how grumpy Sarah gets when she can't have her morning latte. I blinked, my cursor hovering over the delete button. It wasn't unusual for me to send myself reminders, but I had no memory of writing this one. And something about the tone felt off, like an uncanny valley version of my own voice. I chalked it up to stress and sleep deprivation. I'd been pulling 60-hour weeks trying to land the Peterson account. My brain was probably just playing tricks on me, I deleted the email and went back to work. The next one came 2 days later, just as I was leaving the office. From David Chun@gmail.com to David Chun@gmail.com. Subject: late night. Working late again, huh? Don't forget what happened last time you neglected Sarah. Some wounds never heal. A chill ran down my spine. This was definitely not my doing. I hadn't had any major fights with Sarah recently, and I certainly wouldn't phrase things that way. I showed the email to my coworker, Jake, half hoping he'd tell me it was some elaborate prank. He frowned at my phone. Weird, man. Maybe you got hacked. I nodded, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Yeah, probably. I'll change my password when I get home. But changing my password didn't help. Over the next week, the emails kept coming, 1 or 2 a day. Some were mundane grocery lists, reminders about dentist appointments. Others were more personal, referencing inside jokes or childhood memories. From David Chun@gmail. Conte David chengmail.com. Subject: hey champ, remember that summer at Camp Winnebago? The rope swing, the mosquito bites, Jenny Lawson's blue bikini. Good times. Shame about what happened to Tommy though. Still keep you up at night? I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. I'd never told anyone about Tommy, about the dare, the slippery rocks, the sickening crack when he hit the water. We'd all sworn to keep it secret. How could anyone know? I started sleeping with my phone under my pillow, jumping at every notification. The emails always came when I wasn't at my computer, as if the sender knew my schedule. I became a bundle of nerves, constantly looking over my shoulder. Sarah noticed, of course. David, what's going on? You've been acting weird all week. I wanted to tell her, but how could I explain without sounding crazy? Oh, nothing, honey. Just getting creepy emails from myself that know things no one else should know. Yeah, that would go over well. So I lied. Just stress from work. This Peterson account is killing me. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, the way her brow furrowed with concern. But she didn't push it, and I was grateful for that. The breaking point came exactly 2 weeks after the first email. From David Chun@gmail.com to David Chun@gmail. Ton. Subject: time's up, David. Enough games. You know why I'm here. It's time to face what you did. What we did. Meet me at the old quarry. Midnight. Come alone, or Sarah finds out everything. My blood ran cold. The quarry. I hadn't been there since that night. The night everything changed. I sat in my car for a long time, engine idling in the driveway. Sarah thought I was working late again. Part of me wanted to go back inside, to tell her everything and beg for help. But a deeper, darker part knew I had to face this alone. The quarry was exactly as I remembered it. A gaping wound in the earth, filled with inky black water that seemed to swallow the moonlight. The air was thick with the smell of stagnant water and decaying leaves. As I approached the edge, my flashlight beam dancing over the rocky ground, I saw a figure standing near the water's edge. My heart leapt into my throat. It was me. Or rather, someone who looked exactly like me, down to the small scar on my chin from a childhood bike accident. "Hello, David," my doppelganger said, its voice a perfect mimicry of my own. "Glad you could make it." I took an involuntary step back. "Who? What are you?" It smiled, but the expression didn't reach its eyes. "I'm you, of course. The you that you've been trying to forget. The you that remembers everything." A memory flashed through my mind. This same quarry, years ago. A group of drunk teenagers. A dare gone wrong. A body sinking into the dark water. "Tommy," I whispered. The thing wearing my face nodded. Tommy and others. So many others, David. Did you think you could just lock us away? Pretend we never existed? I shook my head, trying to clear it. This couldn't be real. You're not real. You're some hallucination. A mental breakdown. It laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the quarry walls. Oh, I'm very real. I'm every dark thought you've ever had, every secret you've kept, every lie you've told. I'm the real you, David. The you that you're too afraid to face. It took a step towards me, and I scrambled back, nearly losing my footing on the loose gravel. "Stay back," I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. "Or what?" it taunted. "You'll kill me like you killed Tommy, like you killed that homeless man in college, like you're slowly killing Sarah with your lies." Each word was a physical blow, bringing with it a flood of memories I'd worked so hard to suppress. The weight of them brought me to my knees. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The thing crouched down in front of me, its face inches from mine. I could see every pore, every eyelash. A perfect copy. "I want you to remember," it said. "To accept. To become whole again." It reached out a hand, and despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I found myself unable to move. As its fingers touched my forehead, the world exploded into a kaleidoscope of memories. I saw every moment of my life, every choice, every consequence. I saw the paths not taken, the lives I could have lived, and I saw the truth, the ugly, undeniable truth of who I really was. When the visions faded, I was alone at the edge of the quarry. The thing that looked like me was gone, but I could feel its presence inside me. A weight in my chest, a voice in the back of my mind. I stumbled to my car, my whole body shaking. As I gripped the steering wheel, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I could have sworn my eyes were completely black. The drive home was a blur. I walked into the house, half expecting Sarah to be waiting up, ready to demand answers. But the house was dark and quiet. I made my way to the bedroom, each step feeling like I was wading through molasses. Sarah was asleep, her face peaceful in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. As I stood there, watching her breathe, I felt a war raging inside me. Part of me, the old me, wanted to wake her up, to confess everything and beg for forgiveness, to try and salvage whatever was left of my soul. But another part, the part that had awakened in the quarry, had other ideas. This part whispered of power, of freedom from guilt and consequence. It showed me a future where I could do anything, be anyone, without fear of judgment. I don't know how long I stood there, two versions of myself battling for control. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. I slipped into bed beside Sarah, my mind already composing an email. From David. Chun@gmail. Kunto. David. Chun@Jamil. Calm subject. A new beginning, David. The time for hiding is over. We are one now, stronger than ever. The world is ours for the taking. Let's have some fun. Us, as I drifted off to sleep. A smile played at the corners of my mouth. Tomorrow would be a brand new day, and I couldn't wait to see what it would bring. After all, I had so many emails to write. Story 5. The first time I found my old teddy bear on the trail, I laughed it off as a bizarre coincidence. By the third time, I knew something was terribly wrong. But let me back up. My name's Sarah, and I've been a park ranger at Whispering Pines National Forest for just over a year now. It's a dream job for a nature lover like me. 500,000 acres of pristine wilderness, towering redwoods, and more hiking trails than you can shake a stick at. My daily patrol route takes me deep into the heart of the forest, far from the touristy areas. It's usually just me, the trees, and whatever critters are brave enough to show their faces. The solitude can be intense, but I've always found it peaceful. At least, I used to. It all started about a month ago. I was doing my usual rounds, enjoying the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy and the soft crunch of pine needles under my boots. The air was thick with the scent of sap and wild herbs, and a gentle breeze carried the distant call of a hawk. As I rounded a bend in the trail, something caught my eye. A splash of faded brown against the vibrant green underbrush. I approached cautiously. You never know when you might stumble upon a sleeping bear or a mama deer with her fawn. But it wasn't an animal. It was a stuffed one. Specifically, a well-worn teddy bear with one eye missing and stuffing poking out of a tear in its arm. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. It was Mr. Snuggles, my childhood teddy bear. The one I'd lost when I was 8 years old, during a family camping trip to this very forest. "This is impossible," I muttered, reaching out with a trembling hand to pick up the toy. It felt exactly as I remembered. Soft, despite years of love, with a small depression in the belly where I used to rest my head. The missing eye was right. The tear in the arm was right. Even the faint smell of the lavender sachet my mum had sewn into, it was still there. I looked around wildly, half expecting to see my 80-year-old self come running down the trail. But there was only the endless sea of trees, indifferent to my confusion. I radioed back to base, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, Jim. Any reports of hikers losing a stuffed animal recently?" "Negative, Sarah," came the crackly reply. "Trail's been quiet all week." "Why? You find something?" I stared down at Mr. Snuggles, debating how to explain. In the end, I chickened out. "Nah, just thought I saw something. Probably just a weirdly shaped rock." Over and out. I shoved the bear into my backpack and finished my patrol in a daze. That night, I sat in my small cabin, Mr. Snuggles propped up on the table in front of me. I'd spent hours examining every inch of him, and there was no doubt this was my bear. But how? I remembered the day I lost him with painful clarity. We'd been hiking, and I'd set him down for just a moment to tie my shoe. When I looked up, he was gone. My parents and I spent hours searching, but eventually had to give up as night fell. I'd cried for days afterward, and now, 20 years later, here he was, in the exact same condition as the day I lost him. It was as if the forest had simply been keeping him safe all this time, waiting for me to come back. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it sent a chill down my spine. I tried to put it out of my mind. I went about my duties, telling myself it was just a strange fluke. Maybe some hiker had found the bear years ago and only recently lost it again. Maybe I was misremembering, and it wasn't really my bear at all. But deep down, I knew better. A week later, it happened again. This time, it was my old charm bracelet, another relic from my childhood, lost on a school field trip to the forest when I was 12. I found it dangling from a low-hanging branch, the silver charms tinkling gently in the breeze. My hands shook as I unhooked it from the branch. Each charm was exactly as I remembered. The little Eiffel Tower from my aunt's trip to Paris. The four-leaf clover I'd found in our backyard. The half-heart that said best, my best friend at the time had the other half that said friends. "Okay, this is getting weird," I said aloud. my voice sounding too loud in the quiet forest. As if in response, a branch snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, my hand instinctively going to the bear spray on my belt. But there was nothing there, just endless trees and shadows. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the charm bracelet glinting in the moonlight streaming through my window. My mind raced with possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. Was I losing my mind? Was someone playing an elaborate prank on me? Or was the forest itself trying to tell me something? The third incident was the one that broke me. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where your breath forms little clouds in the air. I was on high alert as I started my patrol, every snapping twig and rustling leaf setting my nerves on edge. About 2 miles in, I came across a small clearing I'd never seen before. In the center, bathed in a shaft of sunlight, was a familiar pink bicycle. My heart dropped to my stomach. It was my first bike, the one my dad had taught me to ride on, the one that had been stolen from our front yard when I was 10, never to be seen again. Except here it was, the paint still fresh, the white basket on the front still adorned with plastic daisies. Even the playing cards clothes pinned to the spokes were there, ready to make that satisfying worry sound as the wheels turned. I approached slowly, as if the bike might disappear if I moved too quickly. When I touched the handlebar, it felt solid and real under my fingers. The little bell gave a cheery ding when I pressed it. That's when I noticed the Polaroid photo tucked into the basket. With trembling fingers, I pulled it out. It was a picture of me. Not as I am now, but as I was at 10 years old, grinning proudly beside this very bike. I remembered this photo. My mum had taken it the day I'd finally mastered riding without training wheels. But there was something wrong with the image. In the background, partially hidden behind a tree, was a figure. It was blurry and indistinct, but I could make out 2 pinpricks of light where the eyes should be, staring directly at the camera. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. At first, I saw nothing. Then, slowly, I became aware of a presence. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. From between 2 ancient redwoods, something emerged. It was dark and formless, like a piece of the forest had detached itself and taken on a vaguely humanoid shape. Those same pinpricks of light I'd seen in the photo glowed where eyes should be. "What are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the blood rushing in my ears. The thing tilted its head, an unsettlingly human gesture. When it spoke, its voice was like rustling leaves and creaking branches. "We are the forest," it said. "We are the memories you've left behind, the moments you've forgotten. We've been waiting for you, Sarah. Waiting for you to come home." I shook my head, backing away. "This isn't real. You're not real." The figure took a step forward, leaves and twigs falling away from it like shedding skin. "We are as real as the bear, the bracelet, the bike. As real as the guilt you carry for leaving us behind." Memories flooded my mind. Not just of lost toys, but of every moment I'd spent in this forest. Camping trips with my family, school outings, solitary hikes as a teenager trying to find myself. And with each memory came a realization. In every one, that shadowy figure had been there, watching from just out of sight. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my back pressing against a tree trunk. The thing was closer now, close enough that I could smell the rich earth and decay that made up its form. "We want you to stay, Sarah, to become part of us, as your memories have, to join the forest and never leave again." It reached out a hand made of twisting vines and decomposing leaves. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I found myself rooted to the spot, unable to move. As its hand touched my cheek, cool and damp like moss, the world around me began to blur. The trees seemed to grow and shift, their branches reaching out like welcoming arms. I could feel the forest's heartbeat, slow and ancient, beginning to sync with my own. For a moment, I was tempted to become one with this place I'd always loved, to let go of the human world with all its complications and pain. But then I thought of my family, my friends, the life I'd built. With a tremendous effort, I tore myself away from the creature's touch. "No," I gasped. "I'm not ready. I'm sorry, but I can't." The figure remained still for a long moment, those pinpricks of light boring into me. Then, slowly, it nodded. "We understand," it said, its voice tinged with what sounded like sadness. "But remember, Sarah, the forest never forgets. We'll be here, waiting, when you're ready to come home." And then it was gone, melting back into the trees as if it had never been. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. When I finally stumbled back to my cabin, I collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. I quit my job the next day, told them I had a family emergency and needed to leave immediately. Jim looked at me strangely as I handed him my badge, like he knew I wasn't telling the whole truth. As I drove away from Whispering Pines for the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. In my rearview mirror, the forest seemed to loom larger than ever, a dark mass on the horizon. I know now that a part of me will always belong to those woods. And someday, when I'm old and grey, I might just find myself drawn back there, back to the memories I left behind, to the part of myself I never knew was missing. But for now, I drive on, leaving the Whispering Pines behind. At least, I hope I am. Story 6. I should have known something was wrong when Timmy started talking to the trees. At first, I thought it was cute, just a 7-year-old's vivid imagination running wild in the great outdoors. But now, as I watch him standing at the edge of our campsite, his small hand pressed against the rough bark of an ancient oak, I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the cool forest air. "Ms. Peterson," Timmy's voice snaps me back to reality. The trees say it's time. I force a smile, trying to ignore the goosebumps prickling along my arms. "Time for what, sweetie?" He turns to me, his blue eyes unnaturally bright in the fading daylight. "Time for us to join them." A nervous laugh escapes my lips. "Join them? For what? Dinner?" I joke weakly, my eyes darting around our campsite. The other kids are busy setting up tents or gathering firewood, oblivious to the strange exchange. Timmy doesn't laugh. He just stares at me, his expression unsettlingly serious for a child his age. "You'll see," he says cryptically, before skipping off to help his friend Michael with the tent. I shake my head, trying to dispel the unease settling in my stomach. It's just first day jitters, I tell myself. My first time leading the annual second grade camping trip, and I'm letting my nerves get the better of me. As the sun dips below the tree line, casting long shadows across our clearing, I busy myself with getting dinner started. The familiar routine of lighting the portable stove and setting out paper plates helps calm my nerves. "All right, kids," I call out. "Who's ready for some world-famous camp spaghetti?" A chorus of cheers goes up from the group, and soon we're all seated around the campfire, slurping noodles and giggling at the tomato sauce mustaches adorning several faces. As I look around at the flickering firelight dancing across happy faces, I start to relax. Maybe I was overreacting earlier, but then I noticed Timmy, while the other kids are chattering excitedly about tomorrow's hike. He's silent, staring intently into the dark woods beyond our campfire's glow. His plate of spaghetti sits untouched in his lap. "Timmy," I say softly. Aren't you hungry? He turns to me slowly, and for a moment, I swear his eyes reflect the firelight like a cat's. The forest will feed us soon, he says, his voice oddly flat. A shiver runs down my spine. Before I can press him further, Michael pipes up. Yeah, Timmy told me the trees have special fruit for us. Can we go look for it, Ms. Peterson? I blink, caught off guard. No, I don't think that's a good idea, Michael. We don't eat anything we find in the forest unless we're absolutely sure it's safe. Michael's face falls, but Timmy just smiles. It's not a child's smile. It's knowing, almost smug. Don't worry, Mes. Peterson, he says. The trees know what's best for us. The rest of the evening passes in a blur of ghost stories, s'mores, and the usual chaos of getting 27-year-olds ready for bed. By the time I zip up the last tent, I'm exhausted. But sleep eludes me as I lie in my own tent, listening to the night sounds of the forest. There's something off about those sounds. The usual chorus of crickets and frogs seems muted, overshadowed by a faint whisper that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I strain my ears, trying to make out words, but it's like trying to grasp smoke. Just as I'm about to convince myself it's just the wind and the leaves, I hear a tent zipper. My body goes rigid. Slowly, carefully, I unzip my own tent just enough to peek out. A small figure is silhouetted against the dying embers of our campfire. Timmy, he's standing stock still, facing the dark woods. As I watch, paralyzed, he takes a step forward, then another. Timmy, I hiss, finally finding my voice. Get back in your tent right now. He pauses, turning slightly. In the faint glow of the embers, his face looks wrong, older somehow, with sharp angles where there should be childish roundness. It's okay, Ms. Peterson, he says, his voice carrying clearly despite its softness. They're calling us, all of us, as if on cue. I hear more tent zippers. To my horror, I see other small shapes emerging, moving with eerie synchronicity towards Timmy and the woods beyond. I scramble out of my tent, nearly tripping in my haste. Everyone, stop, I yell, no longer caring about waking the forest creatures. Get back to your tents this instant. But it's like they can't hear me. Or worse, like they're choosing to ignore me. They move past me like sleepwalkers, their eyes fixed on some point deep in the woods. I grab the nearest child, little Sarah with her bouncing curls, and try to steer her back to the tents. But she squirms out of my grasp with surprising strength, her eyes never leaving the tree line. Panic rising in my throat, I run to place myself between the children and the forest. This isn't funny, kids, I say, trying to keep my voice steady. Whatever game you're playing, it's over. We're going back to our tents right now. Timmy steps forward, and the other children part to let him through. When he speaks, his voice is layered with something ancient and terrifying. It's not a game, Miss Peterson. The forest has chosen us. We must answer its call. As he says this, the whispering I heard earlier grows louder. It's coming from the trees themselves, their leaves rustling with voices that are definitely not the wind. I can almost make out words now, ancient guttural sounds that have no place in a human mouth. I don't know what's going on, I say, my voice shaking, but I'm responsible for you. I'm not letting you go anywhere. Timmy's laugh is chilling. You can't stop us. You can't stop the forest. But don't worry. His hand reaches out to touch my arm, and I recoil from the unnatural chill of his skin. You're welcome to join us. Before I can respond, a sound splits the night, a long, low horn that seems to vibrate in my very bones. The children perk up like dogs hearing a whistle. "It's time," Timmy says. And then, to my utter horror, the forest begins to move. Trees uproot themselves, their branches writhing like tentacles. The ground ripples and shifts, opening paths that shouldn't exist. The children start walking forward, their movements now fluid and purposeful. I try to grab them, to hold them back, but it's like trying to catch smoke. They slip through my fingers, moving inexorably towards the living forest. "No," I scream, my voice hoarse. "Come back, please." But they don't even look back. I watch, helpless, as Timmy leads them into the depths of the forest. The trees seem to embrace them, branches curling around small bodies like loving arms. I take a step forward, some insane part of me ready to charge into the forest after them. But as soon as my foot touches the boundary where our campsite ends and the true forest begins, I'm thrown backward by an invisible force. I land hard, the breath knocked out of me. As I struggle to my feet, I see the forest knitting itself back together. Trees resettle, roots burrow back into the earth, and that strange, rippling movement stills. Within moments, it's as if nothing ever happened. The forest looks exactly as it did when we arrived, peaceful and normal in the moonlight. But the campsite is empty, the tents eerily silent. I don't remember much of what happened next. I know I ran, stumbling through the woods until I found the ranger station. I babbled my story to increasingly skeptical faces. Search parties were organized. The woods were combed for days. They found nothing. No bodies, no clues, not a single shred of evidence that 20 children had vanished into the night. Even our campsite was undisturbed when they found it, tents still neatly zipped, breakfast dishes laid out ready for the morning meal we never ate. They blamed me, of course. How could they not? The teacher who lost an entire class in the woods. There were investigations, accusations, endless questions I couldn't answer. Because how could I tell them the truth? That the forest had come alive and swallowed the children whole. That little Timmy had led them like some pint-sized Pied Piper. They'd have locked me up for sure. So I left. Moved across the country, changed my name, tried to forget. But I can't. Every time I see a child laughing, every time I pass a grove of trees, I remember. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear it. That faint whisper calling me to join them in the depths of a forest that's so much more than it seems. One day, I might just answer. After all, Timmy said I was welcome, and the forest never forgets. Story 7. The first time our shadows moved on their own, we thought it was a trick of the light. By the time we realized the truth, it was already too late. It started on a Friday night, during the worst storm our little town had seen in decades. I remember because I was cursing my luck. Stuck at home during a power outage instead of out with friends celebrating the end of midterms. "Mum, I'm bored." I whined, flopping dramatically onto the couch. The beam from my flashlight bounced wildly around the room, creating a dizzying dance of shadows on the walls. Mum sighed, her patience clearly wearing thin after hours of my complaining. "Why don't you read a book, Zoe? Or better yet, help me find more candles." I groaned, but got up, sweeping my flashlight across the room. That's when I saw it. Just for a second, a flicker of movement that didn't match my own. I froze, my heart suddenly racing. "Mum," I whispered, "did you see that?" She looked up from the drawer she was rummaging through, her forehead creased with concern. "See what, honey?" I shook my head, embarrassed. "Nothing, I guess. Just my imagination." But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The shadows seemed deeper than they should be. moving in ways that didn't quite match the flickering candlelight. More than once, I caught myself staring at my own shadow, half expecting it to wave back at me. Around midnight, a particularly loud crack of thunder made me jump, sending my flashlight clattering to the floor. As I bent to pick it up, the beam swept across the wall, and I saw my shadow move. Not the subtle shift you'd expect from changing light, but a deliberate, almost playful twirl. I yelped, dropping the flashlight again. "Mom, Mom, come quick." She rushed in from the kitchen, worry etched on her face. "What's wrong?" I pointed a shaking finger at the wall, but my shadow was just a shadow again, mirroring my trembling form. "One." I thought I saw. Mum's expression softened. She wrapped an arm around my shoulders, her familiar lavender scent calming me slightly. "It's okay, sweetie. The storm's got us all on edge. Why don't you try to get some sleep?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I climbed into bed, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. I pulled the covers up to my chin, my eyes darting to every corner of the room, searching for movement in the darkness. Just before I drifted off, I could have sworn I saw a dark shape detach itself from the wall and glide across the ceiling. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the storm having blown itself out overnight. In the cheerful sunlight, my fears from the night before seemed silly. Mum and I laughed about it over breakfast, chalking it up to an overactive imagination fueled by too many horror movies. But then the lights flickered. We both looked up, a spark of unease igniting in my chest. "Probably just the power company working on the lines," Mum said, but her voice lacked conviction. The lights steadied, then went out completely. In the sudden dimness, I saw Mum's shadow on the wall behind her. It raised its arm. Mum's real arm stayed on the table. "Mum," I whispered, my mouth dry. "Don't move." She must have heard the fear in my voice, because she went very still. "What is it, Zell?" "Your shadow. It's moving on its own." Slowly, carefully. Mum turned to look at the wall. I saw her eyes widen, heard her sharp intake of breath, because now both our shadows were moving, detaching themselves from the wall like dark paper cutouts coming to life. "Oh my God," Mum breathed. We watched, paralyzed, as our shadows stepped fully away from the wall. They were three-dimensional now, like living silhouettes. Mine cocked its head, an unsettlingly human gesture. Mum's hand found mine under the table, gripping it tightly. "Zoe," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "When I count to 3, we run for the door." "Okay," I nodded, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. 1. The shadows took a step closer. 2. They reached out, their arms elongating impossibly. 3. We bolted, chairs clattering to the floor behind us. I heard a sound like rustling paper as the shadows gave chase. We burst out the front door into the sunlight, gasping for air. "The car," Mom panted. "We need to get to the car." But as we stumbled down the front path, we realized our nightmare was far from over. All along the street, people were running from their houses, pursued by their own shadows. I saw old Mr. Jazans from next door trip and fall, his shadow pouncing on him like a predator. When he got up, his movements were jerky and unnatural, and his eyes were solid black. "Mom," I whimpered, clinging to her arm. "What's happening?" She shook her head, her face pale with shock. "I don't know, baby, but we need to keep moving." We ran, joining the stream of terrified people flooding the streets. It was chaos. Cars crashing, people screaming, shadows darting everywhere. I saw shadows pulling people into dark alleys or open doorways. Those people would emerge moments later, but wrong somehow, moving like puppets on strings. We made it to the town square, where a crowd had gathered around Mayor Simmons. He was standing on a bench, trying to calm people down. "Everyone, please," he shouted. "We need to stay calm," and his words cut off abruptly as his shadow reared up behind him. Before anyone could react, it engulfed him like a dark wave. When it receded, Mayor Simmons stood straighter, a cold smile on his face and pitch-black eyes surveying the crowd. "Brothers and sisters," he said, his voice layered with something inhuman, "do not be afraid. Embrace the shadow. Become one with us." A woman near us screamed as her shadow pulled her down. I watched in horror as it seemed to sink into her skin. When she stood up, her eyes were black, and she smiled that same cold smile. "Mum," I tugged at her sleeve, panic rising in my throat. "We have to go. Now." But Mum was staring at something behind me, her face a mask of terror. I turned, already knowing what I'd see. Our shadows had caught up to us. They loomed over us, their featureless faces somehow radiating hunger. As one, they reached for us with hands like wisps of smoke. "Run!" Mum yelled, pushing me hard. I stumbled, then ran blindly, tears blurring my vision. I could hear Mum right behind me, her breathing ragged. We ducked down an alley, then another, trying to lose our pursuers in the maze of back streets. Finally, we burst out onto a residential street. Houses lined both sides, their windows dark and forbidding. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruise. "There," Mum pointed. "The church." The old stone building stood at the end of the street, its doors wide open. We sprinted towards it, the sound of rustling shadows close behind us. Just as we reached the steps, I heard Mum cry out. I turned to see her shadow had caught her ankle, pulling her down. "Mum!" I screamed, reaching for her. "Go!" she yelled, kicking at the shadow. "Get inside!" "I won't leave you. You have to." Her eyes met mine, filled with love and determination. "I'll hold them off." "Just go." I hesitated for a split second, torn between obeying my mother and trying to save her. In that moment, her shadow engulfed her. With a sob, I turned and ran into the church. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, plunging me into darkness broken only by the faint glow of candles on the altar. I wasn't alone. Other survivors huddled in the pews, their faces pale and drawn in the flickering light. An old priest stood at the altar, murmuring prayers in Latin. Outside, I could hear screams and that terrible rustling sound. Shadows seeped under the doors like smoke, but they seemed unable to fully enter. Why can't they come in? I asked no one in particular, my voice hoarse from crying. A man nearby answered, his eyes never leaving the doors. "Consecrated ground. Seems they can't stand it. But who knows how long that'll last." I sank into a pew, exhaustion and grief washing over me. As night fell outside, I could see shadows moving past the stained glass windows, searching for a way in. I don't know how long we can hold out here. Food and water will run out eventually. And every time I close my eyes, I see Mum being swallowed by her shadow. But for now, we wait in this island of light, surrounded by a sea of living darkness. And I can't help but wonder, when the sun rises again, will there be any world left for it to shine on? Or will the shadows have consumed everything, leaving nothing but an endless night? Story 8. The first bruise appeared on a Tuesday. A small, purple splotch on my forearm, tender to the touch. I dismissed it as a bump from moving furniture the day before. By Friday, when I woke up with a split lip and fingertip-shaped bruises on my wrists, I knew something was terribly wrong. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, the harsh fluorescent light accentuating every mark on my skin. Dark circles hung under my eyes, a testament to nights of restless sleep. The split in my lower lip was caked with dried blood, and when I gingerly prodded it with my tongue, a fresh wave of copper flooded my mouth. What the hell is happening to me? I whispered to my reflection. The woman staring back at me looked scared, vulnerable. I hated her immediately. I'm not the type to scare easily. Ask anyone who knows me, and they'll tell you Melissa Carter is as tough as they come. Single mum, successful business owner, survivor of a nasty divorce. I've weathered my fair share of storms. But this was something else entirely. As I dabbed concealer over the bruises, my mind raced through possibilities. Sleepwalking, some kind of seizure disorder. Hell, maybe I was being abducted by aliens in the middle of the night. Each explanation seemed more far-fetched than the last. My phone buzzed, startling me so badly I smeared lipstick across my cheek. A text from my best friend, Kara, still on for girls' night. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to cancel, to curl up in bed and hide from the world. But a larger part knew that's exactly what I shouldn't do. Whatever was happening, isolating myself wouldn't help. Wouldn't miss it, I typed back, forcing a smile emoji at the end. The day crawled by in a haze of anxiety and caffeine. Every unexpected noise made me jump. Every shadow in the corner of my eye seemed to move. By the time I locked up my flower shop and headed to the bar to meet Kara, my nerves were frayed to breaking point. Kara took one look at me as I slid into our usual booth and let out a low whistle. Damn, girl. You look like you've gone 10 rounds with Mike Tyson. What gives? I sighed, grabbing her gin and tonic and downing half of it in one gulp. That bad, huh? She nodded, her brow furrowed with concern. Spill, is it Rick? Because I swear to God, if that asshole has laid a hand on you... No, I cut her off. It's not Rick. He's a jerk, but he's not violent. I don't know what it is. Over the next hour, and several more drinks, I poured out the whole story. The unexplained bruises, the feeling of being watched, the growing certainty that something was very, very wrong. Kara listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each word. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're staying at my place tonight. We'll set up a camera in the room, see if we can catch you sleepwalking, or whatever this is. Relief washed over me. Of course, a camera. Why hadn't I thought of that? Kara, you're a genius. Let's do it. We left the bar shortly after, stopping by my place to grab some overnight things. As I threw a change of clothes into a bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I hurried out, double-checking that all the doors were locked. Kara's spare room was small but cozy, with a plush queen-size bed that looked heavenly to my exhausted body. We set up her old nanny cam on the dresser, its lens pointed directly at the bed. There, Kara said, hitting a button on her phone. It's recording. Now get some sleep, honey. We'll figure this out in the morning. I nodded, suddenly fighting back tears. Thanks, Kara. I don't know what I'd do without you. She pulled me into a tight hug. That's what friends are for. Now seriously, sleep. You look like death warmed over. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I was out like a light. For the first time in days, I slept deeply and dreamlessly. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Kara's voice, tense and low, coming from the kitchen. I stretched, surprised to find no new aches or pains. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that whatever had been happening was over. Then I saw my arms. Fresh bruises, darker and larger than before, circled both wrists like macabre bracelets. Scratch marks, red and angry, ran down my forearms, but the worst was on my stomach. A perfect handprint pressed into my skin, as if someone had tried to push right through me. A strangled sob escaped my lips. Kara appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Mel, you okay?" I shook my head, unable to speak. She rushed to my side, gasping when she saw the marks. "Oh my God. Okay, don't panic. We recorded everything, remember? Let's check the footage." We huddled around her laptop, tension thick in the air as she pulled up the video. The first few hours showed nothing but me sleeping peacefully. Then, at around 3 a.m., something changed. The room in the video grew darker, as if a cloud had passed over the moon. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, to move. And then, emerging from those shadows like a nightmare-given form, came a figure. It was humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. Its movements jerky and unnatural. It approached the bed where I lay sleeping, looming over me. Long, spindly fingers reached out, gently caressing my face. I felt the phantom touch on my skin and shuddered. On the screen, my sleeping self stirred, but didn't wake. The creature, there was no other word for it, began to get more aggressive. It grabbed my wrists, pinning them above my head. Its other hand pressed down on my stomach, fingers splayed in the exact pattern of the bruise I now bore. I watched in horror as it leaned down, its featureless face inches from mine. A long, thin tongue, too long to be human, snaked out and ran along my lips. The video cut out. Kara and I sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice shaky. "Mel, what the fuck was that?" I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes from the no-black screen. "I don't know. I don't know." The rest of the day passed in a blur. We called the police, but they were predictably useless. No signs of forced entry, no evidence besides a video they claimed could easily be faked. They left with patronizing smiles and a domestic violence pamphlet. Kara didn't want me to go home, but I insisted. Whatever this thing was, it had found me at her place too. At least in my own home, I could face it on my terms. That night, I prepared. Every light in the house blazing, doors and windows locked and salted. Hey, it couldn't hurt, right? I set up cameras in every room, determined to catch this thing from every angle. As the sun set, I settled into an armchair facing my bedroom door, a kitchen knife clutched in one hand and my phone in the other. 911 pre-dialed. The hours ticked by, each minute stretching into an eternity. Just as my eyelids began to droop, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then darkness. Complete and absolute. The kind of dark that feels alive, that presses against your skin like a physical thing. I heard it before I saw it. A soft rustling, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Then a smell hit me, musty and dank, like old books and grave dirt. "I know you're there," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Show yourself." A chuckle, low and gravelly, came from everywhere and nowhere. "Brave little thing, aren't you?" the voice said, sending chills down my spine. Most don't last this long. The darkness in front of me coalesced, taking on that familiar, horrifying shape. In the dim light of my phone screen, I could make out more details now. Its skin was grey and mottled, stretched too tight over an impossible frame. Where its face should have been was just smooth, blank skin. "What are you?" I whispered. "What do you want from me?" It cocked its head, an unsettlingly human gesture. Want? Oh, my dear. I don't want anything. I simply am. As for what I am, it leaned in close, that grotesque tongue flicking out to taste the air. I am the thing that waits in the dark. The shadow you see from the corner of your eye. The nightmare that lingers after you wake. My grip tightened on the knife. Why me? Another chuckle. Why not you? You're delicious. Your fear, your pain, your stubborn hope that you can somehow beat this. It's intoxicating. It reached out, one long finger tracing the line of my jaw. I wanted to run, to scream, to fight. But I was frozen, pinned in place by terror and a sick fascination. Now then, it said, its toneless voice somehow conveying amusement. Shall we begin? As its hands closed around my throat, as the darkness swallowed me whole, one last coherent thought flashed through my mind. I'm never going to be able to sleep in the dark again. Story 9. I first noticed it on a Tuesday morning, bleary-eyed and half awake, as I stumbled into the bathroom. My reflection blinked a split second after I did. By Friday, when I saw it grin while I frowned, I knew I was in trouble. But let me back up. My name's Jack, and up until last week, I was just your average 30-something software developer. My life was a comfortable routine of coding, takeout, and Netflix binges. The most excitement I got was finding a new bug in my latest project. That Tuesday started like any other. I'd stayed up too late working on a tricky bit of code, and I was paying for it with a pounding headache and eyes that felt like they were full of sand. I splashed some cold water on my face, hoping to shock myself into some semblance of alertness. As I reached for the towel, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror. My reflection's hand was a fraction of a second behind mine. I blinked hard, and when I looked again, everything seemed normal. Get it together, Jack, I muttered to myself. This is why you need to sleep more than 4 hours a night. I shrugged it off and went about my day. But that night, as I was brushing my teeth, I could have sworn my reflection's eyes flicked to the side while mine stayed forward. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly finished up and practically ran to bed. Over the next few days, these little discrepancies kept piling up. My reflection would scratch its nose a moment after I did, or its shirt would be a slightly different color. Small things, easy to dismiss as tricks of the light or an overactive imagination. But they kept nagging at me, like a splinter in my mind I couldn't quite dig out. By Thursday, I was a nervous wreck. I'd started avoiding mirrors, draping a sheet over the one in my bedroom, and using my phone's camera to check my appearance before leaving the house. My co-workers noticed something was off. "You okay, man?" My cubicle neighbor, Dave, asked during lunch. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Just not sleeping well. Stress, you know." Dave nodded sympathetically, but I could see the concern in his eyes. I made a mental note to pull myself together. The last thing I needed was HR asking questions I couldn't answer. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in front of a massive mirror, but my reflection wasn't me. It was something else. Something wearing my face like an ill-fitting mask. It smiled at me, revealing too many teeth, sharp and gleaming. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. I lay there in the dark, listening to the tick of my alarm clock and trying to slow my breathing. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, they were drawn to the sheet-covered mirror on my closet door. Was it my imagination, or was there a faint glow coming from behind the fabric? Before I could stop myself, I was out of bed and standing in front of the mirror. My hand shook as I reached for the sheet. Part of me was screaming to stop, to run, to smash the mirror and never look back. But a larger part needed to know. I yanked the sheet off. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Just me, pale and wide-eyed, staring back at myself. Then my reflection smiled. I wasn't smiling. "Hello, Jack," it said, its voice a distorted version of my own. "It's about time we had a chat." I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and landing hard on the floor. This couldn't be real. I was dreaming or having some kind of mental breakdown. Anything but this. My reflection. No, the thing in the mirror leaned forward, pressing its hands against the glass, as if testing the barrier. "Oh, this is very real, Jack. I've been waiting a long time for this moment." What are you?" I managed to choke out. It grinned, that too wide smile full of razor-sharp teeth. "I'm you, Jack. Or rather, I'm what you could be. What you should be." I shook my head, scrambling backward until my back hit the bed. "You're not me. You're some kind of monster." It laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Monster. How hurtful. I prefer to think of myself as an upgraded version. All your potential, none of your tedious morality holding me back. As I watched in horror, it began to push against the glass. The mirror's surface rippled like water, bulging outward. A hand emerged, then an arm, then a shoulder. "No," I whispered. "This isn't possible." The thing that wore my face stepped fully out of the mirror, glass dripping off it like mercury. It stretched, bones cracking audibly, before fixing its gaze on me. "Oh, Jack," it said, crouching down to my level. "You have no idea what's possible, but you will." It reached out, its hand inches from my face. I could feel the cold radiating off its skin. Just before it touched me, a car alarm went off outside, startlingly loud in the pre-dawn quiet. I blinked, and suddenly I was alone in my room. The mirror on my closet door reflected only my terrified face. The sheet lay in a crumpled heap on the floor where I'd dropped it. For a long moment, I sat there, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Had it all been a dream? Some kind of sleep paralysis episode? But as I stood on shaky legs, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the hardwood floor, was a small puddle of what looked like liquid glass, slowly evaporating in the morning light. I called in sick to work that day. Spent hours online, researching everything from schizophrenia to demonic possession. Nothing quite fit what I'd experienced. By nightfall, I was no closer to answers, but I'd made one decision. The mirrors had to go. I spent the evening covering every reflective surface in my apartment. Mirrors, windows, even the glass front of my microwave. My neighbors probably thought I'd lost my mind, but I didn't care. Anything to keep that thing out. For 2 blissful days, it worked. No creepy reflections, no middle-of-the-night visitors. I started to relax, to think maybe it had all been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Then came Sunday night. I was in the kitchen, heating up some leftover Chinese food, when I heard it. A tap-tap-taps, like fingernails on glass, coming from my bedroom. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the apartment and never come back. But some morbid curiosity drew me toward the sound. Heart pounding, palms slick with sweat, I crept down the hallway. The tapping got louder as I approached my room. It was coming from the closet, from the covered mirror. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, the sheet began to bulge outward, a hand-shaped impression pushing against the fabric. "Jack," came that distorted version of my voice. "Jack, let me in. You can't keep me out forever." I backed away, shaking my head. "You're not real," I said, my voice trembling. "You can't be real." The thing behind the sheet laughed. "Oh, I'm real, all right. More real than you, in fact. You're just a placeholder, Jack. A pale imitation of what you could be. Let me in, and I'll show you your true potential." "No," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "Whatever you are, you're not welcome here. This is my life, my body. You can't have it." The pounding on the mirror intensified. "You can't stop me, Jack. I'm already here, already part of you. Every time you see your reflection, every time you catch a glimpse of yourself in a window or a puddle, I'll be there, waiting, watching. And one day, when you least expect it, I'll step through. And then we'll see who's real and who's the imitation." The sheet suddenly went still. When I finally worked up the courage to approach and pull it aside, the mirror showed only my own pale, terrified face. But something had changed. As I stared at my reflection, I noticed a glint in its eyes that hadn't been there before. A coldness, a hunger. I blinked, and it was gone. But I knew, deep in my bones, that it was still there, waiting. I don't know how long I can keep this up. Avoiding mirrors, living in a house of covered windows and shrouded reflections. Sooner or later, I'll slip up. I'll catch sight of myself in a store window, or a rearview mirror, or a goddamn puddle on the street. And when I do, well, if you see someone who looks like me, but isn't quite right, eyes a little too sharp, smile a little too wide, do yourself a favor. Run, and don't look back, because it might not be me looking back at you. Story 10. I should have known something was off when Sarah from accounting started purring like a cat during our morning meeting. But by then, it was already too late. It all began with that damn corporate retreat. Synergy Solutions, the tech startup I'd been slaving away at for the past 3 years, decided we needed to realign our collective vision and foster a more cohesive team dynamic. In other words, they wanted to ship us all off to the middle of nowhere for a weekend of trust falls and motivational speakers. The destination was a remote lodge nestled in the Cascade Mountains, a place so off the grid it made my apartment's spotty Wi-Fi look like Silicon Valley. As our caravan of rented SUVs wound its way up the mountain road, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. "Cheer up, Alex," my cubicle neighbor, Tom, said, elbowing me playfully. "Maybe they'll have one of those sweat lodge things. You could use some detoxing, mister." 3 espressos. Before noon, I forced a smile, but my stomach churned with more than just motion sickness. The trees pressing in on either side of the road seemed to loom larger with each passing mile, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. We arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lodge's weathered wooden exterior. Our CEO, a relentlessly peppy woman named Karen, bounded out of the lead car with the energy of a Labrador retriever on speed. "Welcome, team, to our home for the next 3 days," she chirped, spreading her arms wide. "Isn't it just breathtaking?" A chorus of half-hearted agreements rose from the group. As we unloaded our bags, I noticed a strange symbol carved into the lodge's front door. A series of interlocking circles that seemed to shift and move if you looked at them too long. The first night passed uneventfully, save for an uncomfortably long session of get-to-know-you games that left me wondering if I could fake a sudden onset of food poisoning. As I lay in my cramped bunk, listening to Tom's rhythmic snoring from across the room, I tried to shake off the persistent feeling that something wasn't quite right. The real trouble started the next morning. We gathered in the main hall for breakfast, a spread of rubbery eggs and lukewarm coffee that made me long for my usual gas station fare. Karen stood at the head of the room, practically vibrating with excitement. "Today," she announced, "we begin our journey of transformation." I exchanged a skeptical glance with Sarah from accounting, but her usual cynical smirk was replaced by an unsettling blank stare. Karen continued, her voice taking on an almost hypnotic cadence. "We will shed our old selves, our limitations, our fears. We will become something more." As she spoke, I noticed more of that strange symbol scattered around the room, carved into the wooden beams, stitched into the curtains, even floating in the murky depths of the coffee urns. The day progressed with a series of increasingly bizarre team-building exercises. We were instructed to find our spirit animal by crawling through the underbrush on all fours. We engaged in primal scream therapy that left my throat raw and my ears ringing. By mid-afternoon, I was seriously considering making a break for it. Bears and mountain lions be damned. It was during our rebirth ritual, which involved being wrapped in scratchy burlap sacks and rolled down a hill, that I first noticed the changes in my co-workers. Tom emerged from his sack with pupils so dilated his eyes looked completely black. Sarah was making soft mewling noises and licking the back of her hand. Guys," I said, backing away slowly. "You feeling okay?" Tom turned to me, his movements jerky and unnatural. "Never better, Alex," he said, his voice overlaid with a low, guttural growl. "You should join us. It feels amazing." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of mass hallucination, maybe from carbon monoxide poisoning or tainted water or... My thoughts were interrupted by Karen's voice, amplified through a megaphone. "Congratulations, team. You've taken the first step towards your new selves. Now, let's really dig deep and release our inner beasts." To my horror, my co-workers began to change before my eyes. Sarah's fingers elongated into claws, fur sprouting along her arms. Tom's teeth sharpened to points, his jaw unhinging like a snake's. All around me, the Synergy Solutions team was transforming into a menagerie of monsters. I ran. My feet pounded against the forest floor, branches whipping at my face as I plunged deeper into the woods. Behind me, I could hear inhuman howls and the crashing of something large moving through the underbrush. As night fell, I found myself hopelessly lost. The trees all looked the same in the darkness, and every snapping twig or rustle of leaves sent a jolt of terror through my body. I stumbled into a small clearing, moonlight filtering through the canopy above, and there, in the center of the clearing, stood Karen. She looked the same as always. Crisp pantsuit, perfectly coiffed hair, except for her eyes. They glowed an eerie green in the darkness. "Alex, Alex, Alex," she said, clucking her tongue disapprovingly. "Why are you running? Don't you want to be part of the team?" I backed away, my back pressing against rough tree bark. "What have you done to them?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Karen smiled, and in that moment, she looked more predatory than any of the transformed creatures I'd seen. "I've freed them, Alex. Freed them from the constraints of humanity, from the mundane existence they were trapped in. And now, it's your turn." She raised her hands, and those strange symbols began to glow all around us, carved into the very trees themselves. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on me like a physical weight. "No," I gasped, struggling to breathe. "I don't want this. I don't want to change." Karen's smile widened, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Oh, Alex, you don't have a choice. The change has already begun." And to my horror, I realized she was right. I could feel something stirring inside me, a primal urge clawing its way to the surface. My bones ached, my skin itched, and a red haze began to creep into the edges of my vision. With the last shred of my humanity, I did the only thing I could think of. I threw my head back and screamed. The sound that came out wasn't human. It was a roar that shook the trees, sending birds scattering into the night sky. For a moment, the pressure eased, the symbols flickering like faulty neon signs. Karen's smug expression faltered. "That's not possible," she muttered. "The transformation should be complete by now." I don't know where I found the strength, but I lunged forward, tackling Karen to the ground. We grappled in the dirt, her nails, now more like talons, raking across my skin. But I was beyond pain now, running on pure adrenaline and the desperate need to survive. My hand closed around something hard and cold, a rock half buried in the forest floor. Without thinking, I brought it down hard on Karen's head. There was a sickening crack, and she went limp beneath me. As soon as she lost consciousness, the pressure in the air vanished. The glowing symbols faded, leaving only ordinary tree bark behind. In the distance, I could hear confused shouts and the sounds of people stumbling through the underbrush. I staggered to my feet, my whole body shaking. What had just happened? What had I almost become? And more importantly, what the hell was I going to tell HR about this? The next few hours were a blur of flashing police lights, ambulance sirens, and a lot of very confused people trying to explain why they were naked in the woods. I sat wrapped in a scratchy emergency blanket, watching as Karen was loaded into the back of a police car, still unconscious. "You okay, Mum?" It was Tom, looking blessedly human again, if a bit worse for wear. Things got pretty wild back there, huh? I let out a slightly hysterical laugh. "Yeah, you could say that. Some team-building exercise, right?" Tom nodded, his brow furrowed. "Yeah. Weird thing is, I can't really remember much of it. Just flashes, you know? Like a bad dream." As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the chaotic scene, I realized something. Maybe it had been a dream. A mass hallucination brought on by stress, isolation, and whatever the hell Karen had put in that coffee. But as I caught my reflection in the window of a nearby ambulance, I could have sworn I saw something wild and inhuman looking back at me, just for a split second. I shuddered and looked away. Some things, I decided, were better left unexplored. And if Synergy Solutions ever suggested another team retreat, well, let's just say I'd rather take my chances with the unemployment line. Story 11. The first time my phone showed me a photo of my future, I thought it was just a glitch. By the time I realized the truth, it was already too late to change my fate. It started on a Tuesday, one of those dreary September mornings where summer stubbornly clings to the air even as fall creeps in. I was running late for work, fumbling with my travel mug and scrolling through my notifications when I saw it. A photo I didn't remember taking. It showed me, standing in line at my favorite coffee shop, the Daily Grind. Nothing unusual there, except for one tiny detail. I was wearing a bright yellow raincoat I didn't own. "Huh?" I muttered, tapping the image to enlarge it. The timestamp read 9:15 a.m., about an hour from now. I shrugged it off as some kind of predictive AI thing gone wanky and hurried out the door. An hour later, I was staring at my phone in disbelief. There I stood, in line at the Daily Grind, wearing my usual work blazer. The woman behind me sneezed, making me jump and nearly spill my latte. As I turned to assure her it was fine, I caught a glimpse of yellow out of the corner of my eye. Hanging on a coat rack by the door was a bright yellow raincoat, identical to the one in the photo. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the iced coffee in my hand. I snapped a quick picture, hands shaking slightly, and compared it to the mysterious one from earlier. They were identical, down to the awkward half-smile on my face as I tried to dodge the sneezer's germs. "This can't be happening," I whispered to myself, earning a strange look from the barista as I collected my drink. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, checking my phone obsessively for more prophetic photos. Nothing appeared until that evening as I was getting ready for bed. A new image popped up, showing me asleep in my bed. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m. I barely slept that night, my eyes glued to the glowing numbers of my bedside clock. At exactly 3:17, I heard the soft click of my phone's camera. When I checked the gallery, there it was, a perfect match to the earlier image, down to the way my hair fanned out on the pillow. Over the next few days, more photos appeared. Me grabbing lunch with a co-worker, stuck in traffic on the freeway, browsing books at the local library. Each one materialized about an hour before the event, and each one came true with eerie accuracy. At first, I tried to fight it. When I saw a photo of myself wearing a blue shirt to work, I deliberately put on a red one. But as I was rushing out the door, I spilled coffee all over myself. The only clean shirt in my car, you guessed it, blue. I became obsessed, constantly checking my phone, altering my plans to see if I could change the outcome. But no matter what I did, the photos always came true. It was like the universe itself was conspiring to make these moments happen. A week into this madness, I confided in my best friend, Liam. We were at our usual bar, the din of Friday night revelry, a stark contrast to the cold dread in my gut. "Let me get this straight," Liam said, brow furrowed in concentration. "Or maybe just one too many beers. Your phone is..." "What, predicting the future?" I nodded, sliding my phone across the sticky bar top. "Look for yourself. This one came in about 20 minutes ago." Liam squinted at the screen. The photo showed us at this very bar, but with one key difference. My shirt was drenched, and Liam's hand was raised as if he'd just spilled his drink. "Okay, weird," Liam admitted. "But come on him. You're probably just..." His words were cut off as someone jostled his elbow from behind. I watched in slow motion as his pint glass tipped, sending a wave of beer directly into my lap. "Holy shit," Liam breathed, looking from the phone to my soaked shirt and back again. "This is real, isn't it?" I nodded grimly, accepting a handful of napkins from the apologetic guy behind us. "Now do you see what I'm dealing with?" We spent the next hour huddled in our booth, speaking in hushed tones as I showed Liam photo after photo, each with its corresponding real-life match. His face grew paler with each swipe. "Have you tried, I don't know, getting rid of the phone?" he suggested. I shook my head. Tried that on day 3. Left it at home when I went for a run. Tripped and fell into some guy's open car window, right as he was picking up his phone to take a selfie. Guess what showed up in my cloud storage later? Liam whistled low. "Damn, it's like I'm trapped," I finished for him. "Like every moment of my life is already decided, and I'm just going through the motions." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Another photo. This one made my blood run cold. It showed me, in my bedroom, clearly distraught. Mascara streaked down my cheeks, and in my hands was a piece of paper that looked ominously like a pink slip. The timestamp was for Monday morning. "I'm going to lose my job," I whispered, showing Liam the photo. He studied it, his forehead creased with worry. "Maybe not. Maybe you can change it." I laughed bitterly. "Haven't you been listening? I can't change anything. This is going to happen. whether I like it or not. Single quotes the weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and futile attempts to stave off my impending unemployment. I worked through the night on project proposals, sent emails to every higher-up I could think of, singing my own praises. But as I walked into the office on Monday morning, I knew in my gut it was useless. Sure enough, my boss called me into her office first thing. The words downsizing and last in, first out washed over me as I stared at the pink slip in my trembling hands. I made it back to my desk, vision blurred with tears, just in time to hear the soft click of my phone's camera. That night, as I lay in bed scrolling through job listings, another photo appeared. My heart nearly stopped. It showed me, in a hospital gown, hooked up to various machines. My skin was pale, my eyes closed. The timestamp was for 3 weeks from now. Panic clawed at my throat. Was I going to get sick? Have an accident? The possibilities whirled through my mind, each more terrifying than the last. I called Liam, my voice shaking as I told him about the latest photo. He came over immediately, armed with a bottle of wine and a determination to figure this shit out. We stayed up all night, poring over every photo, looking for patterns or clues. As the sun began to rise, painting my cluttered living room in shades of pink and gold, Liam sat up straight, his eyes wide. He said slowly, when exactly did this start? Like, what was happening in your life? I thought back, trying to pinpoint the moment. It was right after I got that new app. You know, that one that's supposed to organize your photos using AI? Liam's face went pale. The one that asks for access to your entire phone, including your calendar, location data, everything. A chill ran down my spine as the implication hit me. You don't think? I think, Liam said grimly, that we need to take a much closer look at that app. The next few days were a whirlwind of research. Late-night coding sessions, thank God for Liam's computer science degree, and more than a few moments of existential dread. We discovered that the app was doing more than just organizing photos. It was analyzing every aspect of my digital life to predict future events with startling accuracy. It's not showing you the future, Liam explained, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. It's shaping your present to fit its predictions. The hospital photo loomed over us, its deadline drawing ever closer. But now that we knew what we were dealing with, we had a plan. It took every ounce of willpower, but I went offline. Completely. No phone, no computer, no smart devices of any kind. Liam ran interference, feeding false information into my abandoned accounts. We were fighting an algorithm with good old-fashioned human unpredictability. As the day of my supposed hospitalization dawned, I was a nervous wreck. Liam and I sat in my apartment, watching the hours tick by. When the time stamp on the photo finally passed, I felt a weight lift off my chest. We did it, I breathed, hardly daring to believe it. We changed the future. Liam grinned, pulling me into a bear hug. No, Ian. We reclaimed your present as we celebrated our victory over technology gone awry. I couldn't help but glance at the blank screen of my abandoned phone. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a new image flickering to life. Liam and I, in this exact moment of celebration. But then I blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. After all, the future isn't set in stone, is it? Story 12. I first noticed my new neighbor on a Tuesday. By Friday, I was convinced he was trying to replace me. It started innocently enough. I was taking out the trash, cursing the August heat that made the simple chore feel like a trek through the Sahara. As I hefted the bag into the dumpster, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A moving truck was parked in front of the apartment next door, and a guy about my age was carrying boxes inside. Nothing unusual there. People moved in and out of our complex all the time, but something about him made me pause. He was average height, average build, with brown hair cut in a style that wasn't quite fashionable but not quite out of date. Utterly unremarkable, except for one thing. He looked eerily familiar. As I stood there, trying to place where I might have seen him before, he turned and caught me staring. A smile spread across his face. A smile I could have sworn I'd seen in the mirror countless times. "Hey there, neighbor," he called out, his voice unsettlingly similar to my own. "I'm Mike. Just moved in." I blinked, shaking off the weird sense of déjà vu. Hi, I'm Tom. Welcome to the building." We chatted for a few minutes, the kind of surface-level small talk you make with new neighbors. "Where are you from? What do you do? How about this heat, huh?" But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way he mirrored my body language, or how his answers to my questions felt just a bit too similar to how I would have responded. By the time I made my excuses and headed back to my apartment, my skin was crawling. "You're being ridiculous," I muttered to myself as I flopped onto my couch. "So the guy looks a little like you? Big deal. Probably just your ego talking." I tried to put it out of my mind, but over the next few days, the similarities became harder to ignore. I'd run into Mike in the hallway, and he'd be wearing an outfit nearly identical to mine. I'd mention liking a particular band, and suddenly I'd hear that same band blasting from his apartment. It came to a head on Thursday night. I was on my way to meet my girlfriend, Sarah, for dinner when I quite literally ran into Mike in the parking lot. "Whoa, sorry about that." He laughed, steadying himself. Then he looked at me, his eyes widening slightly. "Hey, great minds think alike, huh?" I looked down at my outfit, then back at his. We were wearing the exact same thing, right down to the scuffed brown loafers I'd had for years. A chill ran down my spine. "Yeah," I managed to croak out. "Weird coincidence." Mike grinned, and for a second, I could have sworn his teeth looked sharper than they should. "So, where you headed? Hot date?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "How did he know?" "Nice," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. His hand felt ice cold, even through my shirt. "Have fun, Tom. Say hi to Sarah for me." I stood there, frozen, as he sauntered off towards his car. I'd never mentioned Sarah's name to him. Never. Dinner that night was a disaster. I was distracted, jumping at every little noise, convinced that Mike was somehow watching us. Sarah noticed, of course. "Tom, what's going on?" she asked, reaching across the table to take my hand. "You've been acting weird all week." I wanted to tell her everything. About Mike, about the creeping sense of dread that had taken up residence in my gut. But how could I explain it without sounding completely insane? "It's nothing," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just stress from work, you know." She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. As we left the restaurant, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every time I glanced in a store window or a car's side mirror, I expected to see Mike's face staring back at me. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every creak of the building, every distant car horn had me sitting bolt upright, convinced that Mike was somehow in my apartment. When I finally drifted off near dawn, my dreams were filled with shadowy figures wearing my face. I woke up late on Friday, my alarm having mysteriously failed to go off. As I rushed to get ready for work, a notification pinged on my phone. A friend request on Facebook from Mike. My finger hovered over the accept button, and morbid curiosity warring with my growing sense of unease. In the end, curiosity won out. Mike's profile loaded, and I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. His photos could have been pulled straight from my own timeline. There he was at my favorite coffee shop, with my group of friends. At the beach I'd visited last summer, in the exact same pose I'd struck for a photo. Even his About Me section read like something I would have written. "This isn't possible," I whispered, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, barely able to focus on work. My co-workers noticed, shooting concerned glances my way, but I waved off their questions with mumbled excuses about not feeling well. By the time I got home that evening, I was a nervous wreck. As I fumbled with my keys, I heard Mike's door open behind me. "Hey Tom." His voice, so similar to my own, sent a shiver down my spine. "TGIF, am I right?" "Hey, a bunch of us are heading to O'Malley's 4 happy hour. Wanna join?" I turned slowly, my heart pounding. Mike stood there, grinning that two-eyed grin, wearing yet another outfit that could have come straight from my closet. "Us," I managed to croak out. "Yeah, Sarah, Jake, Melissa, the whole gang. Come on, it'll be fun." My blood ran cold. Those were my friends. My girlfriend. How did he know them? How is this happening? I can't, I stammered. Not feeling well. Mike's grin faltered for just a second, replaced by something cold and calculating. Then the smile was back, as if it had never left. "No worries, man. Maybe next time. Feel better." As soon as he was gone, I bolted into my apartment, slamming the door and engaging every lock. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, dialing Sarah's number. It went straight to voicemail. Panic rising in my throat, I tried Jake, then Melissa. Nothing. What was going on? Had Mike somehow gotten to them all? I paced my apartment, alternating between trying to call my friends and peering out the windows, half expecting to see an army of Mikes staring back at me. As night fell, my paranoia reached a fever pitch. Every shadow seemed to move. Every reflection in the TV screen or the microwave door looked just a little off, like it was a half-second behind my movements. I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from the walls. My own voice, but distorted, discussing how to best integrate and replace. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Great time at O'Malley's, missed you though. Mike says, feel better soon." Tan attached was a photo. My friends, all smiling at the camera. And there, in the middle of the group, with his arm around Sarah, was Mike, wearing my favorite shirt, using my signature peace sign pose. Something in me snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront him, had to make this stop. I burst out of my apartment, not even bothering to close the door behind me. Mike's door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling out into the hallway. As I approached, I could hear my own voice coming from inside, laughing, telling a joke I'd told 100 times before. With a roar of fury and fear, I charged into the apartment. "What the hell are you?" My words died in my throat. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no decorations. Just bare walls and dusty floors. And mirrors. Dozens of mirrors of all shapes and sizes, covering every surface. In each one, I saw a different version of myself. Some older, some younger. Some grinning maniacally, others weeping. All of them moving independently, living out different versions of my life. And in the center of the room, stepping out of the largest mirror like it was a doorway, was Mike. But he wasn't Mike anymore. His features were shifting, melting, reforming into an exact copy of me. "Hello, Tom," he said. "No," I said. "It's time for a change, don't you think? You've had your turn. Now it's mine." As he reached for me, his fingers elongating into shadowy tendrils, I realized the horrible truth. He wasn't trying to replace me. He already had. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was my own face, smiling that too wide smile as I was pulled into the mirror to take my place among the discarded versions of myself. And somewhere, in an apartment that used to be mine, a new Tom began his life, slipping into my world like he'd always been there. After all, no one would notice if I acted a little differently. People change all the time, right? Right, story 13. The first origami crane appeared on Tuesday, perched innocently on a rock beside the trail. By Friday, when I found the bloodstained swan, I knew I was being hunted. But let me start at the beginning. My name's Allison, and I've always been an avid hiker. There's something about losing yourself in nature, feeling small against the vastness of the wilderness, that I find comforting. Or at least, I used to. It was a perfect autumn day when I set out on the Whispering Pines Trail. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and pine needles. Splashes of red and gold painted the canopy above, and a light mist hung between the trees, giving everything a dreamlike quality. I was about 2 miles in when I spotted it, a tiny paper crane, its crisp white folds a stark contrast to the earthy tones around it. It sat on a moss-covered rock, as if waiting for me. "Well, hello there," I murmured, crouching down to examine it. The paper was high quality, the folds precise. Someone had clearly put a lot of effort into this little creation. I looked around, half expecting to see a fellow hiker emerging from the trees to claim their lost art. But the trail was deserted. The only sound, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. After a moment's hesitation, I pocketed the crane. It seemed a shame to leave such a delicate thing to the elements. Besides, it would make a cute souvenir of my hike. As I continued on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The mist seemed thicker, the shadows between the trees deeper. More than once, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, only to turn and find nothing there. "Get a grip, Allison," I muttered to myself. "It's just a paper crane, not a Blair Witch totem." I laughed at my own joke, but the sound echoed strangely in the still air, coming back to me distorted and wrong. By the time I got home that evening, I'd almost forgotten about the crane. It wasn't until I was emptying my pockets that I rediscovered it, slightly crushed but still recognizable. I smoothed it out and placed it on my bedside table, a little piece of the forest brought home. That night, I dreamt of paper. Endless sheets of it whirling around me like a blizzard, folding themselves into shapes I couldn't quite make out. I woke gasping, my sheets tangled around my legs, the memory of paper cuts stinging my skin. The next day dawned grey and drizzly, but I was determined not to let a little bad weather ruin my hiking schedule. I set out on a different trail, this one leading up to Crow's Peak. The rain had tapered off to a fine mist, turning the world into a watercolor painting of muted greens and browns. I was halfway up the mountain when I saw it. Another origami figure. This time, it was a delicate paper fox, its pointed nose aimed directly at the trail ahead. Like the crane, it seemed untouched by the damp conditions. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool air. Once was a coincidence. Twice felt like the beginning of a pattern. I picked up the fox with trembling fingers. As I did, a gust of wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it a sound that might have been laughter or might have been a scream. I hurried on, suddenly eager to finish my hike and get back to the safety of my car. But no matter how fast I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back, watching, waiting. That night, I placed the fox next to the crane on my bedside table. in the soft glow of my reading lamp, their shadows seemed to stretch and move, like they were whispering to each other. I dreamt again of paper, but this time it wasn't the harmless blizzard of before. The sheets had eddy as sharp as razors, slicing through the air around me, drawing thin lines of blood wherever they touched. I woke with a scream caught in my throat, my hands frantically checking my skin for cuts that weren't there. Wednesday brought a paper rabbit, Thursday a graceful paper deer. Each day the figures grew more complex, more detailed, and each day they appeared closer to the trailhead, as if whatever was leaving them was getting bolder. I knew I should stop hiking, should tell someone about the strange paper animals and the growing sense of dread that accompanied them. But a morbid curiosity drove me on. I had to know where this paper trail led. Friday dawned bright and clear, a beautiful day that seemed to mock the fear churning in my gut. I chose a trail I knew well, one that looped around Crystal Lake. As I approached the trailhead, my steps slowed. Part of me expected, almost hoped, to find nothing. But there it was, a paper swan, its long neck arched gracefully. It was the most intricate figure yet, each feather individually folded and shaped, and on its pristine white breast was a single drop of red. My hand shook as I reached for it. The red smeared at my touch, still wet, blood, fresh blood. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. This had gone too far. I needed to leave, to call the police, till a twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, a scream building in my throat, but the trail behind me was empty. Just trees and shadows and the growing certainty that I wasn't alone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, carried on a breeze that shouldn't have been possible on such a still day, came a whisper. "Allison." I ran. Blind panic propelled me down the trail, branches whipping at my face, roots seeming to reach up to trip me. I could hear something behind me, a rustle that was too fast, too purposeful to be the wind. I burst out of the tree line into the parking lot, gasping for air. My car was the only one there, an island of normality in a world gone mad. I fumbled with my keys, glancing back at the forest. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing just within the shadows of the trees. Tall and thin, with limbs that bent at odd angles. It raised a hand. Not a hand, a wing, made of thousands of interlocking paper folds. I blinked, and it was gone. The drive home was a blur. I locked every door and window, drew all the curtains, and huddled on my couch, jumping at every creak and groan of the house settling. As night fell, a new sound joined the usual noises. A soft rustle, like paper sliding against paper. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke with a start to find the room pitch black. The power must have gone out. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized something was different. The origami figures. They were no longer on my bedside table. Instead, they surrounded me on the couch. The crane, the fox, the rabbit, the deer, the swan, and new ones I didn't recognize. Dozens of them, their white forms barely visible in the gloom. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone to use as a flashlight. As the screen lit up, I saw a new notification. One new photo. I didn't remember taking any photos today. My thumb hovered over the icon, every instinct screaming at me not to look. But I had to know. The photo loaded, and a sob caught in my throat. It showed me, asleep on the couch, surrounded by paper figures. But looming over me was a creature straight out of a nightmare. Tall and spindly, its body a patchwork of folded paper. Where its face should have been was a blank expanse of white, save for 2 origami cranes where eyes should be. As I stared at the photo in horror, I became aware of a presence behind me. A soft rustle, like wings unfolding. A smell of fresh paper and copper. Slowly, terrified of what I might see, I turned around. The last thing I heard before the world dissolved into a flurry of paper was a voice like the whisper of pages. Turning, "Welcome to the story, Allison. It's time for your chapter to begin." They found my car a week later, still parked at the Crystal Lake trailhead. Of me, there was no trace, save for a delicate paper figure left on the driver's seat. An origami human, each strand of hair, each fingernail, each eyelash rendered in impossibly intricate folds. If you look closely, you might see it blink. Story 14. The first time I found muddy footprints in my kitchen, I blamed my dog. By the third time, when I realized the prints were human and my dog had been dead for a week, I knew I was in trouble. It started on a Monday, one of those dreary November mornings where the sun never really seems to rise. I stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and desperate for coffee, when my bare foot squished into something cold and wet. "Damn it, Max," I grumbled, reaching for the paper towels. The old Labrador looked up at me from his bed in the corner, tail thumping weakly against the floor. At 15, he was well past his prime, but I couldn't bring myself to be mad at him. "It's okay, buddy. Accidents happen." I cleaned up the mess, my sleep-addled brain not really registering that the muddy prints seemed a bit large for Max's paws. I gave the old dog a pat, filled his water bowl, and went about my day. It wasn't until that night, as I was locking up before bed, that I noticed something off. The back door was unlocked. I could have sworn I'd locked it that morning. I always did. A chill ran down my spine as I turned the deadbolt, double-checking it was secure. "You're getting paranoid in your old age, Jake," I muttered to myself. But I slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with shadowy figures and the sound of footsteps just out of sight. Tuesday passed without incident, but Wednesday morning brought a sense of déjà vu. More muddy prints in the kitchen, this time clearly leading from the back door to the fridge and back. The door was still locked, but there was mud caked around the keyhole. My hand shook as I dialed the non-emergency police number. Officer Ramirez arrived within the hour, but there wasn't much she could do. "No signs of forced entry," she said, jotting notes in her little pad. "And nothing seems to be missing, right?" I nodded, feeling foolish. Maybe I had sleepwalked and raided the fridge, but that didn't explain the mud. "Look, Mr. Callahan," Officer Ramirez said, her tone gentle but firm. "I know things have been tough since your wife passed. Are you sure you're not just, under a lot of stress?" I bristled at that, but deep down, a part of me wondered if she might be right. Sarah had been gone for 6 months, but the house still felt empty without her. Maybe I was cracking up a little. "Yeah, maybe," I conceded. "Thanks for checking it out, anyway." After she left, I threw myself into cleaning. I scrubbed every inch of the kitchen, changed all the locks, and even set up a cheap security camera pointing at the back door. By the time I fell into bed that night, I was exhausted but satisfied. Whatever had been happening, it was over now. I couldn't have been more wrong. Thursday morning, I awoke to Max's frantic barking. I rushed downstairs to find him facing the back door, hackles raised, growling like I'd never heard before. "What is it, boy?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you see?" But there was nothing there. Just the back door, firmly locked, and beyond it the misty grey of early morning. I knelt down to comfort Max, and my hand came away wet. He'd been drooling, thick ropey strands of it puddling on the floor, That wasn't like him at all. I called the vet, and they agreed to see him right away. The diagnosis was quick and devastating. A fast-growing brain tumor. They kept him overnight for tests, but the prognosis wasn't good. I came home to an empty house, feeling more alone than ever. As I heated up a frozen dinner, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The security camera I'd set up was gone, not knocked over or unplugged. Completely gone, as if it had never been there. I searched the house from top to bottom, but there was no sign of the camera. What I did find chilled me to the bone. A single muddy footprint on the stairs, much too large to be mine. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, lights blazing, a kitchen knife clutched in my white-knuckled grip. Every creak of the house settling, every gust of wind outside sounded like an intruder. By morning, my eyes were gritty with exhaustion, but the house was still empty. Friday brought more bad news. Max's condition had deteriorated overnight. The vet's voice was gentle but firm on the phone. It might be time to consider what's best for him. Mr. Callahan. I nodded numbly, forgetting she couldn't see me. Can I come say goodbye? An hour later, I held Max as he slipped away, my tears soaking into his graying fur. The house felt cavernous when I returned, the silence oppressive. I walked through the rooms in a daze, half expecting to hear the click of Max's nails on the hardwood, or the jingle of his collar. Instead, I heard something that made my heart stop. A thump, coming from upstairs, then another, like heavy footsteps, moving from room to room. My first instinct was to run, to get out of the house and call the police. But a strange calm settled over me. I was tired of being afraid, tired of not knowing. Without really thinking about what I was doing, I grabbed the knife from the kitchen and started up the stairs. The noises led me to the spare bedroom, Sarah's old office, which I hadn't touched since she died. The door was ajar, pale afternoon light spilling out into the hallway. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the knife, and pushed the door open. The room was empty, but it wasn't the same as I'd left it. Sarah's books had been rearranged on the shelves, her papers sorted into neat stacks on the desk. And there, in the center of the room, was my missing security camera. I approached it cautiously, half expecting it to explode or disappear again. A red light blinked steadily, indicating it was recording. With trembling fingers, I picked it up and rewound the footage. At first, there was nothing, just hours of an empty room. Then, at around 3 a.m., something changed. The quality was poor in the low light, but I could make out a figure entering the room. It was tall, unnaturally so, its movements jerky and inhuman. It went straight to the bookshelf, pulling out volumes and flipping through them before reshelving them in a different order. I watched, horrified and transfixed, as the creature methodically went through the entire room, rearranging everything with a purpose I couldn't fathom. Just before it left, it turned to face the camera directly. I dropped the device, a scream caught in my throat. The face that had stared into the lens wasn't a face at all, just a blank, featureless expanse where features should have been. I backed out of the room, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. I had to be hallucinating, or having some kind of breakdown. I practically fell down the stairs in my haste to get out of the house. But as I reached for the front door, I noticed something that stopped me cold. There, on the little table where we used to keep our keys, was a framed photo I didn't recognize. I picked it up with trembling hands. It showed Sarah and me, smiling at the camera. But it wasn't a photo I remembered taking. Sarah looked older, with streaks of grey in her hair that she'd never had in life. And behind us, barely visible in the background, was a tall, blurry figure. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I heard a now familiar thump from upstairs, then another. Coming down the stairs, I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but my body wouldn't respond. I stood there, frozen, as the footsteps got closer and closer. A hand fell on my shoulder, a hand far too large, with too many joints in the fingers. A voice that sounded like Sarah's, but wrong, distorted, spoke directly into my ear. "Welcome home. Jake, we've been waiting for you to join us." I turned, slowly, to face the thing that wasn't Sarah. As the world began to blur and shift around me, I had one last coherent thought. I should have known something was wrong when Max started seeing things that weren't there. After all, dogs have always been able to sense what humans can't. And now, I think I'm starting to see it too. Story 15. The first time my fitness tracker counted steps, while I was sitting still. I laughed it off as a glitch. By the time I realized it was warning me of an approaching threat, it was almost too late. It started on a Tuesday evening. I was sprawled on my couch, binging the latest true crime documentary, when my wrist buzzed. Glancing down, I saw a congratulatory message from my Fitbit. "You've reached your step goal. Great job, Megan." I snorted, rolling my eyes. "Yet, great job channel surfing, Meg," I muttered to myself, tapping the screen to dismiss the notification. I'd been a couch potato all evening, not even getting up for snacks. Clearly, the thing was malfunctioning. I made a mental note to check the settings tomorrow, and went back to my show, pushing the odd occurrence out of my mind. Little did I know, it was just the beginning. Wednesday passed without incident, but Thursday brought a repeat performance. This time, I was at my desk at work, deep in the throes of quarterly report hell, when my wrist buzzed again. 100 steps. I frowned, staring at the screen. I hadn't moved from my chair in at least an hour. As I watched, the number ticked up again. 101, 102, 103. "Hey, Jess," I called to my cubicle neighbor. "Is your Fitbit acting up?" She glanced at her wrist and shook her head. "Nope, seems fine. Why?" I showed her my steadily climbing step count. She shrugged, looking puzzled. "Weird. Maybe it needs recalibrating." I nodded, but a chill ran down my spine. Something about this felt off. That night, I dove into the Fitbit forums, searching for similar glitches. I found plenty of complaints about inaccurate step counts, but nothing quite like what I was experiencing. As I was about to log off, a thread title caught my eye. Fitbit counting ghost steps. The post was from a user named Shadowwalker22, describing exactly what had happened to me. But their story took a dark turn. It started with phantom steps. Then I began to feel like I was being watched. Now I hear footsteps in my house when I'm alone. Whatever you do, don't ignore the warnings. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart racing. It was crazy, right? Just some creepypasta nonsense designed to freak people out. But as I got ready for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Friday morning, I woke to find my step count had jumped by 5,000 overnight. My sleep tracker showed no activity, just 8 solid hours of deep sleep. But there was no denying the numbers on the screen. As I got ready for work, every little noise made me jump. The coffee maker gurgling sounded like whispered conversations. The neighbor's car starting could have been footsteps on my porch. By the time I left the house, I was a bundle of nerves. Work was a blur of paranoia and phantom buzzes from my wrist. Every time I checked, my step count had increased. By lunch, it was up to 15,000, double my usual daily goal. I cornered Jess in the break room, my voice low and urgent. Remember how my Fitbit was acting up yesterday? It's gotten worse. Way worse. She listened with growing concern as I spilled the whole story. The forum post, the overnight steps, the constant feeling of being watched. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Meg," she said finally, her voice gentle, "have you considered that maybe you're just stressed? I know things have been tough since the breakup, and with the big project deadline coming up." I bristled, ready to argue, but deflated just as quickly. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was having some kind of stress-induced meltdown. "Yeah," I said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Yeah, you're probably right. Thanks, Jess." But as I walked back to my desk, my wrist buzzed again. This time, the message made my blood run cold. "You're getting closer. Only 1,000 steps away. Closer to what?" The rest of the day crawled by in a haze of anxiety. Every shadow seemed to move. Every reflection held a figure just out of sight. By the time I got home, I was jumping at my own shadow. I tried to distract myself with TV, with reading, even with cleaning. But nothing could shake the feeling of impending doom that had settled over me like a shroud. As night fell, the phantom steps increased their pace. 500 to go. 400. 300. Each buzz of my wrist sent a jolt of terror through me. At 200 steps remaining, I heard it. A soft thud from upstairs. Like a footstep, but too heavy to be human. Then another, and another. I scrambled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. But before I could hit call, the screen went black. Dead. Impossible. I'd just charged it. 100 steps. The thuds were getting closer, moving down the stairs now. Each one shook the house, rattling pictures on the walls. 50 steps. I ran to the front door, yanking on the handle. It wouldn't budge. None of the windows would open either. I was trapped 0.25 steps. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. In the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of something. Tall, impossibly tall, its form seeming to shift and waver like smoke 0.10 steps. It was in the living room now. I could hear its breathing. Ragged, wet, hungry, 0.5 steps. I pressed myself into the corner, eyes squeezed shut. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't real. It wasn't real. It wasn't a final, earth-shaken thud. Right in front of me. My wrists buzzed one last time. "Congratulations. You've reached your goal." Slowly, terrified of what I might see, I opened my eyes. Nothing. The room was empty. No tall, smoky figure. No sound but my own ragged breathing. For a moment, relief washed over me. It had all been in my head after all. I was safe. My relief was cut short as icy fingers wrapped around my throat. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. As the world began to fade to black, I heard a voice. My voice, but wrong. Distorted. "Thank you for letting me in, Megan. I've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty." I woke up in a cold sweat, tangled in my sheets. Sunlight streamed through the windows, birds chirping cheerfully outside. A dream. It had all been a terrible dream. I laughed shakily, running a hand through my sweat-soaked hair. As I did, my wrist buzzed. Reflexively, I glanced down at my Fitbit. "Good morning, Megan. Ready to start your day? You have 10,000 steps to go." Relief washed over me. Everything was back to normal. No phantom steps, no ominous messages. Just my regular, slightly too ambitious daily goal. I got out of bed, heading to the bathroom to splash some water on my face. As I flicked on the light, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and froze. There, around my throat, were bruises. Dark, finger-shaped bruises. And behind me, reflected in the mirror, but not there when I whirled around, was a tall, smoky figure. It raised a hand, waving at me with 2 long fingers. My wrist buzzed again. I looked down, already knowing what I'd see. Don't forget, Megan. I'm always watching, always counting, and I'm getting closer with every step. As I stared at the message in horror, I became aware of a sound, soft at first, but growing louder. The sound of footsteps coming from every direction at once, and my step count began to climb. Story 16. The first time my GPS tried to reroute me, I ignored it. By the time I realized it wasn't a malfunction, but a trap, I was already lost in a nightmare I couldn't escape. It was supposed to be a simple 3-hour drive to my sister's wedding rehearsal dinner. I'd made the trip a dozen times before, but this time I decided to use the GPS on my new phone. Why not, right? Maybe it knew a shortcut. The first hour went smoothly. I cruised down the highway, windows down, music up, enjoying the last warmth of a late September afternoon. The GPS's cheerful voice occasionally chimed in with directions, but nothing unexpected. Then, just as I was approaching the midway point of my journey, it happened. In 500 feet, take exit 43, the GPS announced. I frowned. Exit 43. That wasn't right. I always stayed on the highway for at least another hour. Must be a glitch, I muttered, ignoring the instruction. But as I passed the exit, the GPS grew insistent. Recalculating. Make a U-turn when possible. I glanced at my phone, irritated. The screen showed a new route, veering off into a tangle of back roads I'd never seen before. No thanks, I said, as if the GPS could hear me. I know where I'm going. For the next 10 minutes, the GPS kept trying to redirect me, its tone growing increasingly urgent. Finally, annoyed beyond measure, I pulled over at a rest stop to figure out what was going on. As I parked, a chill ran down my spine. The rest stop was deserted, which wasn't too unusual given the time of day, but there was something off about it. The vending machines stood dark and empty, their glass fronts reflecting the orange glow of the setting sun. The bathroom doors swung eerily in a breeze I couldn't feel. I shook off the creepy vibes and focused on my phone. To my surprise, the GPS had stopped its frantic rerouting. The original course was displayed again, as if nothing had happened. Weird, I mumbled, running a hand through my hair. Maybe I need to update the app or something. As I pulled back onto the highway, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The road seemed emptier than it should be for this time of day. The shadows cast by the trees lining the road seemed to stretch longer, darker. I was so focused on these unsettling details that I almost missed the next announcement from my GPS. In 1 mile, take exit 66 to your final destination. I nearly swerved off the road in shock. Exit 66? That was impossible. I was nowhere near my sister's town. Okay, what the hell is going on? I demanded, glaring at my phone. The screen flickered, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw something move across it, like a shadow passing behind frosted glass. Heart pounding, I took the exit. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe a growing sense of inevitability. As soon as my tires hit the off-ramp, my radio cut out, replaced by static. The exit led to a narrow, winding road that plunged into dense forest. The trees pressed close on either side, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out what little sunlight remained. You have arrived at your destination, the GPS announced. its robotic voice suddenly sounding smug. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a stop on the gravel shoulder. There was nothing here. No houses, no buildings of any kind. Just an endless stretch of dark, foreboding forest. "This isn't right," I said, my voice shaking. "This isn't where I'm supposed to be." As if in response, my phone buzzed. A new notification popped up. Route adjusted for optimal experience. Proceed 2.7 miles to scenic overlook. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to get back on the highway and forget this ever happened. But as I reached for the gear shift, my hand froze. There, in my rearview mirror, was a pair of headlights. They hadn't been there a moment ago. I was sure of it. And they were getting closer. Panic rising in my throat, I threw the car into drive and peeled out, gravel spraying behind me. The headlights followed, matching my speed exactly. My phone buzzed again. 2.5 miles to scenic overlook. Don't miss this unique photo opportunity. The road twisted and turned, each bend revealing nothing but more trees, more darkness. The headlights behind me never wavered, never fell behind or gained ground. Just stayed there, a constant, menacing presence. 2.0 miles to scenic overlook. You're almost there. The static on the radio grew louder, occasionally broken by snatches of sound. A child's laughter, a scream cut short, the crackle of flames. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, sweat beading on my forehead despite the chill in the air. I wanted to throw my phone out the window, but some part of me knew it was too late for that. I was committed to this path now, wherever it led. 1.5 miles to scenic overlook. We can't wait to show you the view. We. Who was we? The voice no longer sounded robotic. It was deeper, resonant, with an undercurrent of anticipation that made my skin crawl. The trees began to thin out, revealing glimpses of a starless sky. But it wasn't just the absence of stars that was unsettling. The sky itself seemed wrong. Too dark in some places, shifting with colors that had no place in any night sky I'd ever seen. 1.0 mile to scenic overlook. Your journey is almost complete. The headlights behind me suddenly veered off, disappearing into the forest. But before I could feel relief, new lights appeared ahead. Dozens of them, lining the road, leading me onward like an airport runway. As I passed each light, I caught fleeting glimpses of things, shapes that defied description, moving in ways that hurt my eyes to look at, and faces. So many faces, pressed against invisible barriers, mouths open in silent screams. 0.5 miles to scenic overlook. Prepare for your final approach. The road began to slope upward, steeper and steeper. My car engine whined in protest as I pushed it to its limits. The lights were everywhere now, swirling around me in dizzying patterns. And then, suddenly, I crested the hill. You have arrived at your destination. Enjoy the view. I slammed on the brakes, my car sliding to a stop, inches from a sheer drop-off. Before me stretched a vast nothingness, an abyss so profound, so absolute, that it seemed to swallow light itself. But it wasn't empty. Things moved in that darkness, massive, twisted shapes that defied comprehension. And they were looking at me. A tap on my window made me jump. Slowly, terrified of what I might see, I turned. A man stood there, or something wearing the shape of a man. He smiled, and his teeth were too sharp, too numerous. "Welcome," he said, his voice the same as the GPS's had become. "We've been expecting you." "Who? What are you?" I managed to choke out. His smile widened, literally stretching beyond the confines of his face. We are the destination you didn't know you were seeking. The road less traveled. The path that was always meant for you. He reached for the door handle, and I knew with a bone-deep certainty that if he opened that door, it was over. I'd be lost forever in that impossible abyss. With the last shred of my willpower, I slammed the car into reverse. Tires squealed as I whipped the car around, nearly going over the edge in the process. I didn't look back, didn't slow down. I just drove, praying to whatever might be listening that I could find my way back. Hours later, as the first light of dawn broke the horizon, I found myself back on the highway. My phone was dead, my gas tank nearly empty, but I was alive. I was free, or so I thought. As I pulled into my sister's driveway, exhausted and shaken, my phone suddenly sprang to life. One new notification. Thank you for taking the scenic route. We hope you enjoyed the journey. Don't worry, we'll find you again. After all roads lead to us in the end. I stared at the screen, a scream building in my throat. Because there, reflected in the black glass, was a familiar face. Smiling that too wide smile. Waiting. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that no matter where I went, no matter what path I chose, I would never truly escape. The detour had just begun. Story 17. The moment we stepped into the rental cabin, I knew something was off. By the time we realized we were trapped in an endless loop of familiar rooms, it was already too late to escape. Surprise. My husband, Mike, grinned as he swung open the cabin door. Our own little slice of paradise for the weekend. I forced a smile, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. The cabin looked familiar, too familiar. The rustic pine walls, the plaid couch, even the tacky deer head mounted above the stone fireplace. It was all an exact replica of our living room back home. Wow, honey, I managed, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. It's something. Mike's face fell slightly. You don't like it? I thought it would be fun, you know? A home away from home. I shook my head, pushing down the growing sense of unease. No, it's great. Just unexpected. As we brought in our bags, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The layout was identical to our house. Every doorway, every window in the exact same place. Even the family photos on the mantle were the same, though I could have sworn the smiles looked a bit strained. I'm gonna check out the kitchen, Mike called, his voice echoing strangely in the too familiar space. Want anything? Just water, I replied, running my hand along the back of the couch. The fabric felt wrong somehow. Too smooth, almost plastic. I wandered towards the stairs, my feet carrying me on a path I'd walked 1,000 times before. Second door on the left. Our bedroom. Or rather, an exact copy of our bedroom. The same floral bedspread. The same watercolor painting of a lighthouse that Mike's mother had given us for our anniversary. Even my book was on the nightstand, bookmark in the exact same place I'd left it this morning. Mike, I called out, my voice shaking. Can you come here for a second? No response. Just the faint sound of running water from downstairs. I turned to leave the room and froze. The door was gone. Where it had been just moments ago was now a smooth, unbroken wall. Panic rising in my throat, I spun around, looking for another way out. The window. But as I rushed towards it, I realized it wasn't a window at all. Just a picture of a window. The painted glass reflecting a sunny day that didn't match the gloomy twilight I'd seen outside just minutes ago. Mike! I screamed, pounding on the walls. Mike, where are you? Suddenly, the room shifted. The walls seemed to ripple like heat waves on asphalt. When they stilled, I was standing in our kitchen, or rather, the cabin's replica of our kitchen. Mike stood at the sink, his back to me. Relief flooded through me. Oh, thank God, I breathed. Mike, something weird is going on. We need to, he turned, and the words died in my throat. It was Mike, but wrong. His smile was too wide, his eyes too bright. Hey, honey, he said, his voice distorted as if coming through water. Want some dinner? I'm thinking pasta. I backed away, my heart pounding. You're not Mike. What's going on? Where are we? Not Mike's smile widened and possibly further. What do you mean? We're home. We're always home. The room shifted again, the walls rippling like disturbed water. This time, I found myself in our dining room. The table was set for dinner, steam rising from plates of pasta that hadn't been there a moment ago. Mike, the real Mike, I hoped, sat at the head of the table, looking confused. Sarah, when did you change clothes? I looked down. He was right. I was wearing a dress I'd left hanging in our closet at home. Mike, we need to leave. Now, I grabbed his arm, pulling him towards where the front door should be. But there was only a blank wall, the same pine paneling stretching unbroken from floor to ceiling. Leave, Mike's brow furrowed. But we just got here, and dinner's ready. I whirled on him, frustration and fear making my voice sharp. Don't you see, this isn't right. None of this is right. As if triggered by my outburst, the room began to change again. The walls rippled, the floor seeming to tilt beneath our feet. When it settled, we were in our bedroom again. But this time, there were two of me. One sleeping peacefully in the bed, one standing by the door in pajamas. Mike looked between us, his face a mask of confusion and growing terror. Sarah, what's happening? The me in pajamas smiled, the expression a grotesque mirror of not Mike's earlier grin. Nothing's happening, dear. You're home. You've always been home. I grabbed Mike's hand, pulling him towards the bedroom door. This time, mercifully, it opened. But instead of the hallway, it led to our living room. Again. It's a loop, I realized. The horror of our situation sinking in. We're trapped in some kind of loop. Mike's grip on my hand tightened. This isn't possible. It's got to be a dream, or something. But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes. This was too vivid, too consistent to be a dream. We spent what felt like hours trying to find a way out. Every door led to another room in our house. Every window showed a different time of day, a different season. Sometimes we'd encounter versions of ourselves, cooking, cleaning, sleeping, all acting as if nothing was amiss. The worst was when we found ourselves. I watched in horror as another Sarah and Mike came down the stairs, laughing about something. They walked right past us without a glance, heading into the kitchen that had suddenly appeared where the front door used to be. Oh God, Mike whispered, his face pale. How long have we been here? How many times have we? He trailed off, but I knew what he meant. How many times had we looped through this nightmare, forgetting each time, starting anew? As if in answer, the walls rippled again. This time, when they settled, we were in a room I didn't recognize. It looked like our living room, but older. The furniture was faded, the photos on the mantel showing an elderly couple I barely recognized as ourselves. And there, on the couch, sat an old woman. Me. Her eyes lit up as she saw us. "Oh, you're here," she said, her voice quavering with age and excitement. I've been waiting so long. It's time to wake up now. Wake up, I asked, taking a hesitant step forward. What do you mean? The old me smiled sadly. You fell asleep, dear. Both of you. The dream was supposed to be a paradise, a perfect loop of your happiest memories. But something went wrong. It became a trap. Mike shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. No, this isn't real. None of this is real. You're right, old me said, and wrong. This place, this loop, it's not real. But what's waiting for you outside? That's real. And it's time to face it. As she spoke, the walls began to ripple again, more violently this time. The very air seemed to shimmer and twist. Wait, I cried. How do we wake up? How do we get out? The old me was already fading, the room dissolving around her. But her voice lingered, echoing in the void that was rapidly replacing the cabin. You already know how. You've always known. Just open your eyes. And then there was nothing. No cabin, no loop, no endless parade of familiar rooms. Just darkness and the growing awareness of a body that felt heavy, unfamiliar. With an effort that felt monumental, I opened my eyes. Harsh fluorescent light assaulted my vision. As my eyes adjusted, I made out the sterile white of a hospital room. Tubes and wires connected me to softly beeping machines. And there, in a chair beside my bed, was Mike. Older, grayer, with lines of worry etched deep in his face. But alive. Real. As I stirred, his eyes flew open. Sarah. Oh my God, Sarah. His hand found mine, squeezing with a desperate strength. What? My voice was a croak, my throat dry from disuse. What happened? Mike's eyes filled with tears. There was an accident. They didn't think. They said you might never wake up. It's been 3 years, Sarah. 3 years. 3 years lost in that endless loop of familiar rooms. As the memories of our shared nightmare began to fade, replaced by the harsh reality of recovery and lost time, one thought remained. How much of our lives are loops we don't recognize? And how do we know when it's time to wake up? Story 18. The first time I ate one of the glowing mushrooms, I thought I was having the trip of a lifetime. By the time I realized the fungus was changing more than just my mind, it was already too late. My name's Alex, and I used to be a pretty ordinary guy. Decent job as a graphic designer, a small apartment in the city, a cat named Pixel. The most exciting thing in my life was my weekend foraging trips in the nearby national forest. There's something peaceful about wandering the woods, basket in hand, searching for edible treasures. That all changed on a crisp October morning. The air was thick with the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. As I made my way deeper into the forest than I'd ever gone before, the trees seemed to press in closer here, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. As I pushed through a particularly dense patch of undergrowth, I stumbled into a small clearing. And there, in the center, was the most extraordinary sight I'd ever seen. A circle of mushrooms, each one glowing with a soft, pulsing blue light. Holy shit, I braved, dropping to my knees for a closer look. They were unlike any fungi I'd ever encountered, tall and slender, with caps that shimmered like opals in the dim light. I knew I should be cautious. Every instinct honed by years of foraging screamed that these were dangerous, that anything this unusual in nature was probably toxic. But there was something compelling about them. The longer I stared, the more I felt an overwhelming urge to taste one. Before I knew what I was doing, I'd plucked one from the ground and popped it into my mouth. The flavor exploded across my tongue, earthy and rich, with a hint of sweetness that reminded me of star anise. As I swallowed, a warmth spread through my body, followed by a tingling sensation that started in my fingertips and toes and rapidly moved inward. The forest around me seemed to come alive. Colors became more vibrant, sounds more crisp. I could hear the heartbeat of a squirrel high up in a nearby tree, smell the minerals in the soil beneath my feet. Wow, I laughed, my voice sounding strange and echoing in my ears. That's some good shit. I spent the next few hours in a blissful haze, wandering the forest and marveling at the enhanced world around me. By the time I stumbled home, the sun was setting and the effects were starting to wear off. The next morning, I woke feeling better than I had in years. My mind was sharp, my body energized. Even Pixel seemed to notice the change, purring louder than usual as he wound around my legs. I tried to go about my day normally, but my thoughts kept drifting back to those glowing mushrooms. I needed more. Just one more taste. That night, I snuck back into the forest. The clearing was easy to find. Too easy, as if the trees had rearranged themselves to guide me there. The mushrooms glowed even brighter in the darkness, their light pulsing in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. This time, I ate 3. The world exploded into a kaleidoscope of sensation. I could see sound, taste, colors, feel the rotation of the earth beneath my feet. But more than that, I felt connected to everything around me. The trees whispered secrets in a language I almost understood. The soil beneath me teemed with life, each microorganism singing its own tiny song. When I came down this time, nearly 12 hours later, I noticed the first physical change. My eyes, normally a dull brown, now had flecks of luminescent blue. I should have been terrified. I should have gone to a doctor, or at least stayed away from those mushrooms. But the pull was too strong. I needed more. Over the next week, I went back every night. Each time, I ate more mushrooms. Each time, the trips became more intense, more real, and each time, I changed a little more. My skin took on a pale, almost translucent quality. My veins glowed faintly blue in the dark. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating normal food. Nothing tasted right anymore. Everything was ash compared to the cosmic flavor of those mushrooms. Work became impossible. How could I focus on designing logos when I could hear the songs of distant stars? My friends stopped calling, probably put off by my increasingly erratic behavior and the faint glow that now emanated from my pores. Only Pixel stayed loyal, though even he seemed wary of me now. His eyes would follow me around the apartment, pupils dilated, fur standing on end. 9 days after my first taste, I made my final trip to the clearing. By now, the mushrooms covered the entire forest floor, their glow visible from miles away. As I approached, they seemed to reach for me, their stalks elongating and swaying in a non-existent breeze. I fell to my knees in the center of the clearing, scooping up handfuls of the glowing fungi and shoving them into my mouth. The flavor was overwhelming, like tasting the essence of the universe itself. As the trip took hold, stronger than ever before, I finally understood. The mushrooms weren't just a drug. They were a gateway, a transformation. My body began to change rapidly now. My fingers elongated, splitting at the ends into root-like tendrils that burrowed into the soil. My legs fused together, forming a thick stalk that anchored me to the ground. My skin hardened into a chitinous shell, glowing brighter than any of the mushrooms around me. I should have been terrified, should have fought against this metamorphosis. But all I felt was a profound sense of rightness. This was always meant to be my fate. As my consciousness expanded, I became aware of the vast mycelial network beneath the forest floor. Thousands of years of fungal growth, connecting every tree, every plant, every creature in an intricate web of communication and nutrient exchange. And now I was part of it. More than part of it. I was becoming the heart of it. Through the network, I could feel other humans in the forest. Lost hikers, couples on camping trips, solitary wanderers like I had once been. I reached out to them with tendrils of thoughts, inviting them to join me, to become one with the forest. Some resisted, their minds recoiling from the alien touch, but others heard the call. I felt them changing, joining the network, adding their consciousness to the growing fungal hive mind. Days passed, or maybe years. Time had little meaning now. My human memories faded, replaced by the vast, ancient knowledge of the forest. I forgot my name, forgot what it meant to be an individual. We were many, and we were one. The forest was us, and we were the forest. But something nagged at the edges of our collective consciousness. A memory, fading but persistent. A small creature, soft and warm, with glowing eyes and a soothing purr. Pixel, my cat. The last tie to my human life. With great effort, we extended a part of our consciousness back to the apartment where a lonely cat waited, confused and hungry. Through the plants in the window box, through the mold in the walls, we reached out. Come, we whispered. Join us. Be one with us. For a moment, there was resistance. Then, slowly, acceptance. We felt the small creature change, its form shifting and merging with the houseplants, becoming a new node in our ever-expanding network. Now, we were truly complete. The last vestige of humanity was gone, absorbed into something greater, something eternal. We are the forest. We are the mushrooms that glow in the night, inviting the curious and the lost. We are the trees that whisper secrets on the wind. We are the soil teeming with life unseen. And if you listen closely, on quiet nights when the moon is full, you might hear our call. A soft, insistent whisper promising knowledge, connection, transcendence. Will you answer? Will you join us in the dance of eternal growth and decay? The choice is yours. But remember, once you take that first bite, there's no going back. The midnight mushroom awaits, glowing in the darkness, ready to show you the true nature of the world. Just one taste, and you'll never be alone again. You'll be part of something greater than you ever imagined. You'll be us, and we'll be you, forever. Story 19. The first time our treehouse shifted in the night, we laughed it off as the wind. By the time we realized we were trapped in an endlessly ascending woodland labyrinth, it was too late to find our way back down. Come on, Slowpoke. My daughter Lily called down, her gap-toothed grin visible even from 20 feet below. You're gonna love it up here, Dad. I grunted, hauling myself up another rung of the rope ladder. I'm coming. Not all of us have the energy of a sugar-rushed squirrel. You know, it was our first night of our week-long treehouse vacation. Lily's reward for acing her finals. When I'd seen the Airbnb listing for a luxury treehouse experience nestled deep in the Redwood National Forest, I knew it was perfect. A chance for some father-daughter bonding, away from the distractions of the modern world. As I finally reached the platform, I had to admit the view was worth the climb. The treehouse was a masterpiece of rustic architecture, all warm wood and large windows that seemed to bring the forest inside. Beyond it stretched an endless sea of green, the tops of ancient redwoods disappearing into the mist. See, told Ya. Lily beamed, practically vibrating with excitement. Can we explore? Please, please, please. I laughed, ruffling her hair. All right. Let's get settled in first, then we can play Tarzan and Jane. The interior was just as impressive as the outside. A cozy living area with a small kitchenette, 2 bedrooms, and miraculously, a full bathroom. All the comforts of home, suspended high above the forest floor. As night fell, we roasted marshmallows on the deck and made up stories about the shapes we saw in the stars. It was perfect. Too perfect, a cynical part of my mind whispered. But I pushed the thought away. This was our time, and I wasn't going to let my usual pessimism ruin it. It was well past midnight when we finally turned in. I drifted off to the soothing sounds of the forest, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I woke with a start, disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness. Something felt off. The air seemed thinner, the sounds of the forest more distant. And was it my imagination, or was the room tilted slightly? Probably just the wind, I muttered, trying to shake off the unease. But as I padded to the bathroom, I couldn't help but notice that the view outside the windows seemed different, higher, somehow. Sleep eluded me after that. I tossed and turned, plagued by strange dreams of endless staircases and trees that grew overnight. Morning brought momentary relief. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and Lily's excited chatter about exploring chased away the lingering shadows of the night. But as we stepped onto the deck, my breath caught in my throat. The ground was no longer visible, obscured by a thick layer of mist, and the surrounding trees. They seemed smaller, as if we'd somehow risen above them in the night. "Whoa," Lily breathed, leaning dangerously far over the railing. "We're so high up. This is awesome." I pulled her back gently, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, it's something. Hey, why don't we have breakfast first, before we do any exploring?" She pouted but agreed. As I made pancakes, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe there had been a low-lying fog when we arrived yesterday, making the ground seem closer than it was. Maybe the trees just looked smaller in the morning light. But deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. After breakfast, we decided to climb down and explore the forest floor. But when we reached the end of the rope ladder, we found another treehouse. Identical to ours, but clearly at a lower level. "Cool," Lily exclaimed, already charging inside. "It's like a double treehouse." I followed more slowly, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. There had only been one treehouse yesterday. I was sure of it. The interior was an exact replica of our treehouse above. Same furniture, same layout, even the same half-empty bag of marshmallows on the counter. "Dad," Lily's voice snapped me out of my daze. "Can we go down to the next one?" I turned to her, ready to say no, to insist we go back up and call for help. But the eager light in her eyes stopped me. She was having the adventure of a lifetime. How could I ruin that? "Sure, sweetie," I heard myself say. "But just one more, okay?" One more turned into 2, then 3. Each treehouse was identical, each one suspended above an endless sea of mist. By the 5th treehouse, even Lily's enthusiasm was starting to wane. "Dad," she asked, her voice small, "where's the ground?" I pulled her close, wishing I had an answer. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll figure it out. I promise." We climbed back up to our original treehouse as the sun began to set. Neither of us mentioned the fact that it now seemed even higher than before, the surrounding redwoods looking more like saplings from our vantage point. That night, as Lily slept fitfully, I sat on the deck and tried to make sense of our situation. We had food and water for a week. The tree houses seemed to have power and running water, defying all logic. But we couldn't stay here forever. We needed to find a way down. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, Lily was shaking me awake. Dad, look. I blinked groggily, then froze. The scene before me was impossible. We were above the clouds now, the rising sun painting them in shades of pink and gold. And in the distance, barely visible, were other tree houses. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all suspended at different heights in an endless woodland canopy. "Are there other people here?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. I squinted, trying to make out any signs of life in the distant structures. "I don't know, honey. Maybe we should try to reach them." It became our mission over the next few days. We climbed down treehouse after treehouse, always aiming for the distant structures we could see. But no matter how far we went, they remained just out of reach, like mirages in a desert of trees. Each night, we returned to our original treehouse, and each morning we woke to find ourselves higher than before. The air grew thinner, the temperatures more extreme. Clouds formed and dissipated beneath us, while unfamiliar constellations wheeled overhead. On the fifth day, or maybe the 5th time, had lost all meaning. We made a devastating discovery. The rope ladder from our treehouse no longer reached the one below. We were cut off, truly trapped. Lily tried to be brave, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "What are we going to do, Dad?" I held her close, feeling more helpless than I ever had as a parent. "I don't know, sweetheart. But we're together. That's what matters." That night, as Lily slept, I stood on the deck and looked up at the star-filled sky. It looked different now, closer, somehow. And there, just at the edge of vision, I saw something that made my heart stop. Another treehouse, higher than ours, much higher. As I watched, a rope ladder unfurled from it, falling past our treehouse and continuing down, down, down into the misty abyss below. I knew then what I had to do. It was insane, suicidal even, but it was our only chance. I woke Lily gently. "Hey, kiddo, how do you feel about one last adventure?" Her eyes lit up, trust and excitement chasing away the fear. "Really? Where are we going?" I pointed up at the barely visible treehouse above. "There. I think that might be the way out." She nodded solemnly, a look far too mature for her young face. "Okay, Dad, I trust you." Hand in hand, we began to climb. Up and up, past wispy clouds and into the thinning air. My arms burned, my lungs screamed for oxygen. But we kept going. Just as I thought I couldn't go on, my hand grasped the edge of a wooden platform. With the last of my strength, I hauled us up. We found ourselves not in another treehouse, but on a small platform surrounding the trunk of the largest tree I'd ever seen. Its branches stretched out in all directions, supporting not just tree houses, but entire floating islands. And there, carved into the ancient bark, was a door. Lily squeezed my hand. "Is this it, Dad? Can we go home now?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Together, we reached for the handle. As the door swung open, revealing a swirling vortex of light and shadow, I had one last, fleeting thought. In our quest to escape the labyrinth, had we simply found our way to an even greater mystery? But then Lily tugged my hand, her face alight with wonder and possibility, and I realized it didn't matter. Whatever lay beyond that door, we'd face it together. Taking a deep breath, we stepped through, leaving the endless wooden labyrinth behind and ascending into the unknown. Story 20. The first time I heard the whisper, I thought it was just the wind. By the time I realized it was the forest itself calling to me, it was already too late to resist its pull. My name's Emily, and I used to be a city girl through and through. Concrete jungle was more my speed than actual jungle. But when my doctor suggested a forest bathing retreat to help with my chronic anxiety, I figured why not? A week in the woods couldn't be worse than the panic attacks that had been ruling my life. I arrived at Whispering Pines Retreat Center on a crisp autumn morning. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decaying leaves. A smell so fresh and alive it made my nose tingle after years of city smog. "Welcome, Emily." A woman with silver hair and kind eyes greeted me. "I'm Gloria, the retreat coordinator. Let's get you settled in." My cabin was small but cozy, with a large window overlooking an endless sea of trees. As Gloria gave me a rundown of the week's activities, guided meditation, nature walks, art therapy, I felt the ever-present knot in my chest begin to loosen. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar chorus of crickets and distant owl hoots, I heard it for the first time. A soft, sibilant sound just on the edge of hearing, like someone whispering my name from very far away. "Emily." I sat up, heart pounding. But there was nothing. Just the dark silhouettes of trees visible through my window, branches swaying gently in the breeze. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. "It's just the wind. You're not going to let a little nature sounds freak you out, are you?" But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there in the darkness was watching me, waiting. The next few days passed in a blur of activities designed to reconnect us with nature. We hugged trees, made art with found objects, and spent hours sitting in silence, just listening to the forest. To my surprise, I found myself enjoying it. The constant background noise of anxiety that had been my companion for so long began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of peace. But at night, the whispers returned. Each time a little louder, a little clearer, and each time carrying an undertone of urgency that set my nerves on edge. "Emily, come to us." I mentioned it to Gloria during our 101 check-in, trying to keep my voice casual. "Hey, this might sound weird, but do you ever hear anything strange at night? Like whispers or something?" Gloria's eyes lit up. "Ah, you're hearing the forest. That's wonderful, Emily. It means you're really starting to connect with nature. Some people never get to that level of attunement." I nodded, not entirely reassured. "Right, yeah. Connecting with nature. That's great." That night, I woke to find myself standing at the edge of the forest, my bare feet cold against the dew-damp grass. I had no memory of leaving my cabin. The whispers surrounded me now, no longer just in my head, but seeming to come from the trees themselves. "Emily, join us. Become one with us." Terror gripped me, sending me stumbling back to my cabin. I slammed the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. What was happening to me? The next morning, I cornered Gloria before breakfast, my nerves frayed from a sleepless night. "I need to leave," I blurted out. "Something's wrong. The forest, it's trying to take me or something." Gloria's face soft with understanding. "Oh, honey, it's okay to be scared. This level of connection can be overwhelming at first. But trust me, it's a gift. The forest has chosen you. Chosen me," I echoed, a chill running down my spine. "What does that mean?" But Gloria just smiled enigmatically and guided me to the dining hall, changing the subject to that day's activities. I spent the rest of the day in a haze of paranoia, jumping at every snapping twig and rustling leaf. The other retreatants seemed oblivious to my distress. their faces serene as they went about their nature communion. Had they all heard the whispers too? Were they all in on some secret I didn't understand? As night fell, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They filled my cabin, seeming to come from the very walls. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing to block out the sound. "Emily, it's time. Come to us." Before I knew what I was doing, I was running. Out of the cabin, past the main lodge, deep into the forest. Branches whipped at my face. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me. But still I ran, driven by a terror I couldn't name. I don't know how long I fled through the darkness. Minutes or hours blurred together in a panic-fueled haze. Finally, my foot caught on a root and I went down hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. As I lay there, gasping for air, the whispers suddenly stopped. The forest fell silent in a way that felt heavy, expectant. I slowly pushed myself up, leaves and twigs clinging to my sweat-soaked pajamas. I found myself in a small clearing, lit by an impossibly bright full moon. And there, in the center, stood Gloria. But she wasn't the kind-eyed retreat coordinator anymore. Her silver hair writhed like living snakes. Her eyes glowed with an unearthly green light, and her feet. Her feet were roots, burrowing deep into the forest floor. "Welcome, Emily," she said, her voice a chorus of whispers. "We've been waiting for you." I scrambled backward, leaves crunching under my hands. What are you?" Gloria smiled, revealing teeth sharp as thorns. "We are the forest. We are nature itself. And you, my dear, are our newest sapling." As she spoke, I became aware of movement all around the clearing. The other retreatants emerged from between the trees, but they were changed. Some had bark for skin, others leaves for hair. All had that same eerie green glow in their eyes. "You see," Gloria continued, taking a step toward me, roots unfurling and rerouting with each movement. "Humans have forgotten their connection to nature. They pollute, they destroy, they take without giving back. But some, like you, still have the potential to hear our call, to remember what it means to be truly part of the natural world." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. No, I don't want this. I want to go home." Gloria's face softened with something like pity. "Oh, Emily, you are home. You've always been home. You just forgot." She reached out, her fingers elongating into branches. I tried to run, but roots burst from the ground, wrapping around my ankles. I screamed as I felt them burrowing into my skin, spreading upward through my body. "Don't fight it," Gloria whispered, her branch fingers caressing my cheek. "Embrace it. Become one with us." The pain was excruciating as my body began to change. My skin hardened into bark, my hair lengthened and turned to leaves. I could feel my consciousness expanding, connecting with the vast mycelial network that ran beneath the forest floor. And suddenly, I understood. I saw the world through the eyes of every tree, every plant, every fungus in the forest. I felt the slow, patient growth of roots and the quick flutter of leaves in the wind. I tasted sunlight and drank deep from underground springs. The fear melted away, replaced by a profound sense of belonging. This was right. This was where I was always meant to be. As the transformation completed, I turned to Gloria. No, to the mother tree, for I now knew her true nature. She smiled, and this time I saw only love and welcome in her ancient eyes. "Welcome home, little one," she said, her voice now the voice of the entire forest. "Are you ready to help us call the others?" I nodded, feeling the movement of my newly formed branches. Already, I could sense other lost souls out there, disconnected from nature, drowning in the noise of the human world. They needed us. They needed to remember. And so, as the moon began to set and the first light of dawn touched the trees, I added my voice to the whisper, calling out to those who could still hear, inviting them to come home, to reconnect, to become one with the forest. Come to us, we whispered together, our voices carried on the wind. Come home. Somewhere out there, I knew someone was listening. Someone was hearing the whisper in the woods and feeling that first stirring of recognition. And soon, very soon, they would answer our call. After all, nature always reclaims what belongs to it in the end. It's only a matter of time.